Chapter 742. Taking the blacksmith examination. You aren't a blacksmith yet? Yuan Hong's body swayed weakly from sheer shock, and he nearly spewed a mouthful of blood onto the other party's face. The other master teachers who had gathered in the area out of curiosity also had their eyes bulging in astonishment. You aren't a blacksmith, and yet you are here to take the 5-star examination? And you still dare to say that you aren't here to cause trouble? Blacksmithing was a part of the Upper Nine Paths, one of the most prestigious occupations in the continent. Countless had devoted innumerable years of their lives to refining their skills, forsaking sleep and meals just to be accepted into this esteemed organization. Even the most talented of blacksmiths would require a decade of training before they could challenge the 5-star organization. Those who were less talented might even take 50 years just to prepare for it. And yet, a 20-year-old fellow who wasn't even a 1-star blacksmith actually wanted to challenge the 5-star examination? Did you think that blacksmith is an occupation which you could master on a whim? You are taking it way too lightly. I have learnt smithing on my private time, I just haven't had the time to take the examination yet. Noticing everyone's dumbfounded gaze, realization struck Zhongxian, and he hurriedly came up with an explanation. Since that's the case, why don't I start from the 1-star examination? Is it possible to take the 1-star examination here? Or do I have to take the apprentice examination first? Even though Zhongxian's smithing capability was above even that of Wu Yangzi, he had never taken any blacksmith examination before. In terms of ranking, he was currently even beneath that of an apprentice, let alone a blacksmith. Apprentice. Hearing those words, Yuan Hong's lips twitched, and he grabbed his face in frustration. If he hadn't witnessed this sight for himself, he would never have believed it to be true. To think that a person who wasn't even an apprentice yet would come to the blacksmith school and declare that he was going to take the 5-star examination. On top of that, he even created a huge fuss in the school, collapsing the passageway of records along with half of the entire branch. More importantly, despite all of this, one of the 10 great master teachers, Zhao Bingshu, was still interested in taking him as his direct disciple. All of this, he had seen with his own eyes. But even so, he couldn't help but feel as though he was in a dream. There's no need for you to take the apprentice examination, you can take the 1-star examination straight. For the time being, just try to pass the 1-star examination first. As for 5-star, we'll talk about it in the future. Suppressing the frustration he was feeling, Yuan Hong turned to the master teacher crowd behind and asked, "Does any of you have an apprentice emblem?" As a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith in the blacksmith school, even his weakest student was a 5-star blacksmith at the minimum. As a result, he didn't have any spare apprentice emblems with him. Apprentice emblem? Is there likely to be anyone with an apprentice emblem in the blacksmith school? The crowd in the area shook their heads. Most of those gathered around were 5-star blacksmiths, and even the weakest of the crowd was a 4-star at the minimum. As such, it would be difficult for them to find an apprentice emblem all of the sudden. This. Yuan Hong looked around awkwardly. What the heck was this? To think that a day would come where a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith like him would end up having to look for an apprentice emblem, and fail to find one at that. Vice School Head Yuan, I have one here. At that moment, a timid voice suddenly sounded. Zhongxian turned around and saw Li Xian, the female receptionist who had been bringing him around previously, stepping forward and offering her emblem. While she was working at the blacksmith school, she wasn't too involved in the occupation. As a result, she was still an apprentice blacksmith at the moment. Good. Yuan Hong heaved a sigh of relief. Taking the emblem, he imprinted Zhongxian's name on it before passing it to the latter. Zhongxian, this shall be your apprentice emblem. With this, you should be able to activate the ocean of weapons and take the 1-star blacksmith examination. Thank you. Zhongxian took the emblem and nodded. He walked up to the stone pedestal, and just as he was about to place his emblem and academic credit card on it, he suddenly recalled something and turned around. If I were to pass the 1-star examination, would I have to expend more academic credits if I wanted to continue taking the 2-star examination? If you remain in the ocean of weapons, you won't have to expend any more academic credits. However, once you step out of the doors, you will have to pay more academic credits if you want to enter once more and take the examination again, Yuan Hong replied. With 2 academic credits, one could activate the Ocean of Weapons once. As long as the Ocean of Weapons remained activated, there would be no need for one to expend any more academic credits to reactivate it for the subsequent examinations. In a sense, it was like paying for a ticket to the museum. As long as the entrance fee was paid, one could remain within until closing time. It was only after leaving the museum that one would have to repurchase another ticket to enter its premises once more. Upon hearing that he would have to expend more academic credits to enter the Ocean of Weapons once more if he were to leave the area, Zhongxian immediately asked worriedly, "I won't have to expend any more academic credits as long as I remain within? Then, once I clear the 1-star blacksmith examination, can I proceed on with the 2-star examination?" The 2 academic credits he currently had didn't come easily. He would have to spend a great deal of effort in earning more academic credits if he had to spend 2 for each rank promotion. Even if the elder before him was willing to finance him, he would still feel guilty taking the academic credits of others for his own use, especially considering how valuable they were. On top of that, if he were to accept the favor of others without giving an equivalent return, he would owe a karmic debt to the other party. The reason Zhongxian had been reluctant to accept the favor of others for free all along was due to the messy implications that came along with it. If possible, he would like to avoid it for as long as he could. Of course you can. However, the Ocean of Weapons will only remain activated for 4 hours regardless of which examination you are taking. Regardless of whether you are able to successfully forge a weapon or not, you will be evicted from the premises once time is up. I don't think that you will have sufficient time to challenge the other examinations after clearing the 1-star examination, Yuan Hong explained. The underlying motive behind the creation of the Ocean of Weapons was to accommodate for a greater number of students in taking the blacksmith examination. Given that, if they were to allow students to camp inside the facility after paying 2 academic credits, wouldn't that be contrary to its primary purpose? As such, a time limit of 4 hours was imposed on the system. Regardless of how one's progress in the examination was, one would be evicted without fail once the time was up, even if their weapon was already on the verge of completion. If a student were to deem that 4 hours was insufficient for them to clear the examination, the student could always pay more academic credits to extend their time. In this case, an academic credit would correspond to an additional 2 hours. If the student successfully cleared the examination, the Ocean of Weapons would distribute a new corresponding emblem. Otherwise, they would leave empty-handed. Since Zhongxian had 2 academic credits, he would be allowed to stay within the Ocean of Weapons for 4 hours. However, weaponsmithing was an extremely lengthy process. 4 hours might be sufficient for him to smith a weapon to clear the 1-star examination, but to be able to smith another one for the 2-star examination in that limited time, it didn't seem too plausible. Besides, smithing was an extremely laborious process that consumed an immense amount of zhenqi. Considering Zhongxian's current cultivation, just smithing a single weapon could easily consume up more than half of his zhenqi capacity, so even if there was sufficient time, it would be nigh impossible for him to smith 2 weapons consecutively. As such, while Vice School head Yuan thought that it was good that Zhongxian was driven, he didn't think that it was a feasible idea. Even he, as a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith, could only smith 2 to 3 weapons within 4 hours. Anything more than that was impossible. Unlike pills, weapons, regardless of their grade, require ceaseless hammering and refinement in order to shape and refine it. 4 hours. All right then. Hearing that he only had this amount of time, Zhongxian nodded. After clarifying everything, he placed his blacksmith apprentice emblem and academic credit card on the stone pedestal, and with a bright surge of light, the doors to the Ocean of Weapons opened. Without any hesitation, Zhongxian walked in. The Ocean of Weapons seemed to operate via a mechanism somewhat similar to the passageway of records. The room Zhongxian stepped into was completely dark, and with an abrupt rumbling beneath his feet, he was transported to a hall. Placed within the hall were all kinds of ores and metals. There was also a large cauldron and furnace by the side. This is supposed to be an illusion? Zhongxian couldn't help but mutter in awe. Taking a swift glance around him, he realized that everything in this room was extremely vivid and detailed, making it hard to discern it from reality. Previously, the female receptionist, Li Xian, had told him that the ocean of weapons utilized an illusion formation in order to simulate a lifelike smithing experience. This was indeed what was happening to Zhongxian right now. Everything around him was fake, regardless of how real it all looked. Taking a look around him, Zhongxian saw a pile of books on the table before him. He walked up to it and flipped through them casually. Written in them were the smithing methods of various weapons. Examinees could pick any one of these smithing methods for the examination if they wanted to, but this wasn't a compulsory criterion for the examination. As long as the weapon they smithed reached a certain grade, they would be deemed to have cleared the examination. I only have 4 hours. I must hurry so that I can take the 5-star examination. Knowing that academic credits didn't come easily, Zhongxian wasn't content with just clearing the 1-star examination. It would be best if he could clear the 5-star examination in a single go so that he wouldn't have to return here again. Thus, it would be best for the weapon I smith to be as simple as possible so as to minimize the time spent on them. There was a clear difference in the difficulty between forging a metal ingot into a sword and hammer, and the time required for the both of them would be different as well. Unlike pill forging, where each ingredient must be carefully prepared in order to forge a satisfactory pill, there's no need for me to be too thorough in the forging of the weapon. Since only the grade of the weapon is being assessed here, there's no need for me to pursue perfection. A weapon's grade was determined by factors such as its resilience, flexibility, sharpness, medium for zhenqi, and such. Aesthetics took a secondary role in determining the grade of the weapon. While going through the additional effort of hammering the weapon into the perfect shape and size would boost the utility of the weapon as well, this wasn't a vital aspect of the blacksmith examination. Since that was the case, there would be no need for Zhongxian to spend additional effort on shaping the metal ingot. As long as he were to take careful note of the proportion of metal used in creating the alloy, as well as the refinement and quenching process, he should be able to create a decent weapon. After browsing through the books, Zhongxian frowned. It'll take too long to hammer the metal ingot into the shapes depicted in these books. Not only would it be hard to do so given his lack of practice in hammering, more importantly, he also didn't have the time to waste on it either. If he were to follow the smithing process listed in any of the books, it would be impossible for him to successfully smith any weapons without at least 2 hours of effort. If that was going to be it, he wouldn't even have enough time to clear the 2-star examination. Forget it, I should just start first. Tossing the book aside, Zhongxian swiftly examined the 8 ores and metals on the table as he swiftly simulated the various combinations of alloys he could make with them. Having learned the Heaven's Path smith art, his understanding of smithing was already beyond most 6-star pinnacle blacksmiths. While the ores and metals before him were inferior materials that were suited only for smithing low-tier weapons, as long as he were to complement their strengths well, he would still be able to create a decent weapon. All right, this should do, Zhongxian muttered as a confident smile crept onto his lips. With a light flick of his wrist, the 8 metals and ores immediately rose from the table and flew into the searing furnace. Tzzzzzzzz. As Zhongxian infused his zhenqi into the furnace, it began to glow crimson. The ores and metals swiftly melted and flowed out of the furnace from a groove by the side. Synthesize. With another flick of his wrist, the metallic fluid separated into 8 distinct fluids, and they began synthesizing with one another through a series of sequences. Chapter 743. Is it too late to practice? With nimble movements from his fingers, Zhongxian precisely manipulated the metallic fluids with his zhenqi. Those metallic fluids clashed with one another in midair, producing resounding melodic metallic clangs reminiscent of the music from a keyboard. If a blacksmith were to be present here, he would surely be left with his mouth agape upon seeing this sight. This was no longer smithing but a performance. It was a melody perfectly aligned with nature. The reason Wu Yang's zither forging technique was so sought after was due to its alignment with nature, making the arduous smithing a pleasurable activity. However, the smithing technique that Zhongxian was utilizing here was clearly far more profound than the zither forging technique. Not only was it an enjoyment to the eyes and the ears, one might even find one's soul resonating in pleasure to it. Heaven's Path smith art. Hoo. Before long, the 8 metallic fluids were completely synthesized with one another, forming a solid alloy. Following which, Zhongxian threw the alloy into the water trough by the side. Tz la. As soon as the searing metal alloy came into contact with the water, steam immediately rose from the water surface. This was the final step of smithing, quenching. Typically, smithing consisted of 3 steps: synthesizing the metals and ores into an alloy, forging the alloy into its intended form, and quenching the weapon to strengthen the material. Zhongxian had jumped from the first phase right into the third phase, skipping the second phase. In smithing, the forging phase was extremely important. If a weapon was forged properly, it could enhance its grade as well. Skipping the second phase meant that his work couldn't be considered as a true weapon, and thus, its grade would take a steep fall. However, it also spared him from the most arduous and lengthy process of hammering his weapon into its intended form, thus significantly speeding up his smithing process. The searing alloy caused the calm water in the trough to bubble furiously. After some time, Zhongxian flicked his wrist, retrieving the alloy from the water. Timing was essential for quenching. The duration for which a weapon was immersed into a quenching fluid would affect the quality of the end product. Zhongxian had used 8 different types of ores and metals to create his alloy, each with vastly different properties. While they could serve to complement each other's strengths, if he couldn't grasp the perfect timing for the quenching, it could introduce an imbalance within the weapon, causing the various metals and ores to hinder the functions of one another. If that were to happen, the resulting alloy would be severely weakened, turning it into a failed product. Alright, this should be it. Having completed the quenching process, Zhongxian glanced at the metal lump in his palm and scratched his head awkwardly. If he were to take this metal lump out and call it a weapon, he would surely be mocked by the other blacksmiths, and his reputation would plummet. Fortunately, he was only in a simulation. Sighing deeply, he walked up to the grading pedestal and placed the metal lump on it. The grading pedestal served to gauge the quality of the weapon smithed, and as long as the weapon achieved the required grade, the examinee would be deemed to have cleared the examination. Wang. A light buzz sounded, and a red light glowed. Following which, a mechanic voice announced, using the most basic lava stone, white steel, black pebble, the examinee has managed to smith a phantom low-tier weapon. Congratulations, you have passed the 1-star blacksmith examination. This metal lump has reached phantom low-tier? Not bad. Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. In truth, this was his first time smithing, so he didn't have a precise gauge of how he had fared. To think that this lump of metal would be considered as a phantom low-tier weapon. Weapons could be divided into 5 tiers: God, Saint, Spirit, Phantom, and Mortal. The criterion for clearing the 1-star blacksmith examination was to smith a mortal pinnacle weapon. Even though the weapon Zhongxian had smithed using the Heaven's Path smith art was crude, bearing no semblance to a weapon whatsoever, it was still graded as a phantom low-tier weapon due to the quality of its alloy. If it were to be properly forged into a weapon, it could easily reach phantom intermediate tier or even high tier. After clearing the 1-star examination, Zhongxian spoke up without any hesitation. I request to challenge the 2-star blacksmith examination. Gyaya. The entire area abruptly darkened, and the rumbling of mechanisms whirring into action sounded. By the time the area lit up once more, he was already in another hall. The entire layout was similar to the 1-star examination hall, but the area was visibly larger. There was a larger variety of ores and metals placed on the table in the room, and most of them were higher grade and rarer than the ones offered in the 1-star examination. Time to start work again. After swiftly examining the selection of ores and metals, Zhongxian picked 17 of them and threw them into the furnace. Working as he had previously, another metal lump was soon standing in front of him before long. This metal lump looked even more horrendous than the previous one smithed. It was completely black, and no one would ever be able to make a correlation between it and a weapon. This was the result of skipping the forging phase of the smithing process. The forging process was essential to giving shape to the alloy. If one wanted a sword, one would have to hammer it into a sword. If one wanted a dagger, one would have to hammer it into a dagger. However, putting aside the fact that this phase was extremely time-consuming, hammering was also a skill that one could only master through hands-on experience. With no prior experience whatsoever, It would be nigh impossible for Zhongxian to shape the weapons properly even if he were to attempt it in earnest. Since that was the case, he decided to skip it altogether. Once again, he placed the metal lump on the grading pedestal. Wang. With a brilliant flash of red light, a mechanical voice announced, "The examinee has managed to smith a phantom intermediate tier weapon. Congratulations, you have passed the 2-star blacksmith examination." After clearing the 2-star blacksmith examination, Zhongxian immediately moved on to the 3-star. An hour later, taking a deep breath, Zhongxian said, "I request to challenge the 5-star blacksmith examination." After challenging 4 examinations consecutively, he was starting to feel a little drained despite his pure zhenqi. Hula! The mechanisms rumbled into action once more, and an even larger room came into sight. They are all actually the same hall, it's just my perception of it that has changed. After undergoing the venue switching procedure several times, Zhongxian soon realized that despite the various differences among the examination halls, the location where he was hadn't changed at all. In the first place, the examination halls were only a simulation created by the ocean of weapons, not a real location. As such, changing the venue wasn't a difficult job: ashen star rock, purple topaz metal, green dust stone. The materials offered in this examination sure are far better than the ones in the previous examinations. Zhongxian remarked in awe as he examined the selection of ores and metals in the room. There were plenty of rare materials in the previous 4 examinations as well, but they paled in comparison to the current spread before him. Both the ashen star rock and the purple topaz metal were materials which transcendent mortal experts would kill to get their hands on. With them, they could forge top-notch weapons. However, these superior materials did little to alleviate the grimness on Zhongxian's face. While better materials did allow for the forging of better weapons, the criterion to clearing the examination was rising at an even faster pace. To clear the 5-star blacksmith examination, he would have to smith a spirit intermediate tier weapon. It was impossible to smith a weapon of that tier with just good materials in hand. More importantly, one had to wield incredible control over the metals and ores and command an extremely high understanding of the quenching process. Otherwise, the slightest mistake made could result in the wastage of these precious materials. Hoo. Zhongxian's hands went through the various metals and ores nimbly, synthesizing them together one by one. Unlike previous times, he was working with the metals and ores in the furnace this time around. As such, he had to regulate the temperature in the furnace through his zhenqi simultaneously. Each metal and ore had its own melting point. In order to create a spirit intermediate tier weapon, each material had to be processed carefully to bring out the finest properties within it in the resulting alloy, so the temperature had to be carefully regulated in the synthesis phase. Soon, just as Zhongxian's zhenqi was just about to be completely depleted, he finally finished synthesizing the last ore into the alloy. Exhaling deeply, Zhongxian threw the metal lump into the water trough by the side. Quench. Tzzzzzz. A dense layer of mist formed around the water trough, concealing it from sight. Zhongxian activated his eye of insight to keep a close eye on even the most trivial of changes in the metal lump, and as its quality finally reached its peak, he quickly took it out. Based on his experience in the previous examinations, he learned that it was easier for him to grasp the condition of the quenching process through his eye of insight, thus further enhancing the quality of the final product. Test. Once again, Zhongxian placed the metal lump on the grading pedestal. Wang. A mechanical voice announced, "The examinee has managed to smith a spirit intermediate tier weapon. Congratulations, you have passed the 5-star blacksmith examination." "I've passed the examination." Seeing that it was a success, Zhongxian's body finally gave into exhaustion, and he fell weakly onto the ground. Even though he had skipped the hammering stage, it was still tough work controlling the flames in the furnace with his zhenqi. At this point, his zhenqi was nearly completely depleted. It was fortunately that he had still succeeded eventually. "I should heal up first." Sitting on the ground, Zhongxian flicked his wrist, and a jade box appeared in his hands. Opening the jade box, he immediately felt a gush of incredibly pure spiritual energy blowing at him. It felt as if small needles were pricking his skin, creating a tingling sensation. A translucent stone sat inside the box. This was Zhongxian's first time using a high-tier spirit stone. Those whose cultivation was too low would be unable to assimilate the pure spiritual energy within a high-tier spirit stones into their body. Even if they could absorb it, the spiritual energy would still leak from the minuscule pores in their meridians. The meridians within the human body was similar to a sandpit in some ways. There were many fine pores in them such that while thick and viscous mud could flow through it, pure water would usually seep right through those pores, resulting in immense wastage. In this analogy, the pure water would be referring to the concentrated spiritual energy within a high-tier spirit stone. Spiritual energy, in its purest form, was extremely fine, to the point that it could easily seep through the smallest openings. Even if an ordinary human were to try to absorb the spiritual energy within a high-tier spirit stone, they wouldn't be able to retain the slightest bit of it in their body. Only upon reaching transcendent mortal 9-dan chrysalis realm would the openings in one's body be sealed like a cocoon, forming a seamless body. Only then would one be able to absorb the spiritual energy within a high-tier spirit stone to strive for greater heights. Zhongxian was currently only at Cosmos Bridge realm, 3 realms away from reaching chrysalis realm. Typically speaking, even if he had a high-tier spirit stone in his possession, he shouldn't be able to use it. However, having cultivated Heaven's Path Zhenqi, his body had already been reformed by it, granting him a physical body far stronger than other cultivators. On top of that, he had also reached the second incandescence of the quintuple incandescence golden body. This granted him enhanced control over his body, allowing him to seal his pores to retain the fine spiritual energy from the high-tier spirit stone within his body. Gu. As the pure spiritual energy circulated in Zhongxian's body as per the Heaven's Path divine art, it was swiftly converted into zhenqi before being deposited in his dantian. His depleted dantian swiftly filled up, reaching full capacity within 30 minutes. As expected of a high-tier spirit stone, I was able to recover swiftly. Zhongxian stood up and did some stretches. If it had been a middle-tier spirit stone or a spirit gathering formation, it would have taken at least several hours for his zhenqi to fully recover. However, through absorbing the spiritual energy in a high-tier spirit stone via the Heaven's Path divine art, he was able to recover within just 30 minutes. This was a pace comparable to most pills forged specially for recovering one's zhenqi. I still have another hour to go, Zhongxian thought in delight as he returned the high-tier spirit stone to his storage ring. With an hour left, perhaps he might have enough time to challenge the 6-star blacksmith examination. While his current cultivation was still a little too low, the depth of his comprehension in smithing was superior to most 6-star pinnacle blacksmiths. If he could pass the 6-star blacksmith examination as well, he would be spared from spending even more academic credits here. Based on what he had seen and heard so far, he could tell that academic credits were extremely difficult to earn. There would surely be many places where he would require them in the future, so it was best for him to save as much as possible for the time being. Challenging the 6-star blacksmith examination is a little beyond my current cultivation at the moment. If I want to clear the examination, I won't be able to skip the forging phase anymore. The reason Zhongxian had been able to clear all of the previous examinations was because of the superior quality of the alloy he had created. As such, even though the weapons he had smithed so far were just mere lumps of steel, they were still able to reach the required grade. However, in the 6-star examination, he would have to handle ores and metals which were beyond his current cultivation, and this meant that he wouldn't be able to process them as freely as he had all along. Due to that, it was unlikely that he would be able to clear the examination based on the quality of the alloy in itself. In other words, if he wanted to clear the examination, he would have to forge the weapon. However, he had no experience with hammering whatsoever. If he were to start practicing now, would he still be able to make it in time? Chapter 744. Attempting the 6-star blacksmith examination. I won't be able to make it in time. Hammering, just like pill forging, was a hands-on skill which could only be mastered through countless years of practice. Even with the library of Heaven's Path guiding him along, it would still be impossible for him to master the skill in time with only an hour left on the clock. Just as Zhongxian was distressed as to what he should do next, a thought suddenly flashed across his mind, and his eyes lit up in excitement. Wait. Even though I can't forge a sword or those of that sort, I can turn the iron lump into a hammer. That should be much easier than other weapons. There were many intricacies behind swords and sabers which made them extremely difficult to forge them, but that shouldn't be the case for hammers. With just a few hits on the metal lump, he should be able to create a hammer easily. All right, it's decided then. With a smile on his lips, Zhongxian shouted, I request to challenge the 6-star blacksmith examination. Wang. The sight before Zhongxian changed once more, turning into an even larger hall. Many ores and metals that would have been difficult to find in real life appeared before him. After some contemplation, Zhongxian picked out a few dozen of them and brought them to the furnace. Xiong. Tossing the ores and metals into the furnace, Zhongxian began with his smithing. Meanwhile, Yuan Hong and a group of master teachers were standing outside the ocean of weapons, waiting for the results of the examination. After all that had happened, it was already nearing midnight. However, it didn't seem like anyone had the intention to leave. That Zhongxian fellow had caused such a huge mess in the blacksmith school, but not only did vice school head Yuan not punish him, he even escorted him to the ocean of weapons for him to take the blacksmith examination. Everyone was curious to see what kind of legendary figure Zhongxian was for a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith to treat him with such respect. How far do you think he can advance in the ocean of weapons? Do you even need to ask? With just 4 hours on the clock, he will only be able to clear the 1-star examination. Even if he is a talented blacksmith who is capable of producing weapons at an unprecedented speed, he'll only be able to clear the 2-star examination at the maximum. Anything beyond that is physically impossible. Indeed. Just take the forging process for example. In order to hammer the alloy into the perfect shape, one would have to spend at least an hour or two on it. Even seasoned blacksmiths wouldn't be able to go any faster than that. Everyone muttered with hushed voices. Since that fellow declared that he would be challenging the 5-star blacksmith examination, he should possess the ability to smith a spirit intermediate tier weapon at the minimum. However, due to the time limit within the ocean of weapons, it would be difficult for him to reach 2-star. Anything further than that would be plain impossible. As such, there was no one here who really thought that he would be able to clear the 5-star blacksmith examination today. Nevertheless, for a person who had never challenged the blacksmith examination before, clearing 2 stars simultaneously was still an incredible feat. Just as everyone was waiting patiently for the results from the ocean of weapons, footsteps suddenly sounded. Turning their heads over, everyone saw a few elders walking over. Look, the school head is here. No, it isn't just the school head. The other vice school heads as well. Why are they all here? They probably heard about the matter here and came over to take a look. The one who was leading the group was the head of the blacksmith school, one of the 10 great master teachers, Zhao Bingshu. There were 3 elders walking behind him, and they were the remaining 3 vice school heads. After conducting a meridian and bone cleansing for Luo Chichi and the others, they decided to head over here to see if the legendary student would be able to clear the 5-star blacksmith examination. School head. As if having guessed that the school head would come, Yuan Hong didn't seem surprised in the least. He clasped his fist and greeted the other party. How is it? Has he begun the 5-star blacksmith examination yet? Judging from the current time, he should be done soon, Zhao Bingshu asked with a smile. 5-star blacksmith examination. This. Yuan Hong muttered awkwardly. Bewildered by Yuan Hong's reaction to his words, Zhao Bingshu asked doubtfully, what's wrong? Isn't it Zhongshe who is undergoing the examination inside at the moment? It's indeed him who is inside, but it appears that Zhongshe has never taken a blacksmith examination before, so he is currently challenging the 1-star examination, Yuan Hong replied. He has never taken any blacksmith examination before? Zhao Bingshu exclaimed. The other 3 vice school heads behind him were also stunned by the revelation. Since that fellow had never taken the 1-star examination before, why in the name of Kong Shi was he attempting to challenge the 5-star examination? Yes. Yuan Hong nodded. His intention before entering the ocean of weapons seemed to be to challenge the 2-star examination after clearing the 1-star examination. I wonder if he will be able to succeed. Before entering the ocean of weapons, that fellow had asked if he could challenge the subsequent examinations as well, so he was probably preparing to do so. It would be difficult, but that fellow might just be able to pull it off. Are you curious? Actually, we can just take a peek at it. Zhong Bingshu chuckled. Take a peek. But the ocean of weapons is still in operation. How do we take a look? Yuan Hong was bewildered. By right, as long as the ocean of weapons was still in operation, it was impossible to know the results of the test inside. Otherwise, he wouldn't be waiting here. While it's indeed impossible to see the results within the ocean of weapons, we can always try to apply for the emblem for him. If the emblem appears, it will mean that he has cleared the one-star examination, Zhao Bingshu said as he stroked his beard. That. Indeed. Why didn't I think of that? Yuan Hong slapped his thigh and chuckled. The emblem would be dispatched outside after one cleared the examination in the ocean of weapons. As long as one had cleared the examination inside, the system would distribute an emblem when an application was sent in. It was impossible to know the results of the blacksmith examination directly since Zhong Xian wasn't out yet, but they could use this method to know how far he was into the examination. If they were to succeed in applying for the one-star emblem, it would mean that he had already cleared the one-star examination and was in the midst of challenging the two-star examination. Such a simple matter, but to think that it had slipped his mind. All right, I shall give it a try. Yuan Hong stepped forward, placed his hand on a button on the gigantic doors of the ocean of weapons, and pressed it lightly. There was a momentary burst of light before an emblem fell from an aperture below the button. Oh! He cleared the one-star examination? Yuan Hong muttered as he grabbed the falling emblem. It was Zhong Xian's one-star blacksmith emblem. Since it was dispatched, it could only mean that Zhong Xian had cleared the one-star examination. Since he has cleared the one-star examination, he should probably be in the midst of the two-star examination at the moment. Zhao Bingshu nodded. It is about to be 4 hours soon. Let me give it a try to see if he has passed the two-star examination yet. Yuan Hong pondered for a moment before placing his palm back on the button. Wang. Another burst of light, and an emblem fell from the aperture once more. This is the two-star emblem? He has cleared the two-star examination as well? Yuan Hong froze for an instant before hurriedly reaching out to grab the falling emblem. In his view, clearing an examination within 4 hours was already extremely difficult in itself. Even if there was some spare time after clearing the one-star examination, the chances were that the examinee would already be exhausted by then, making it nearly impossible to clear the next one. Yet, this fellow actually cleared 2 examinations consecutively. Was this for real? He's cleared the two-star examination? Zhao Bingshu was taken aback as well. He walked up to Yuan Hong, took the emblem from him, and examined it carefully. Inscribed on it was Zhong Xian's name. There was no doubt about it, he had cleared the two-star examination within the 4-hour limit. But if he has cleared the two-star examination, why isn't he out yet? Could it be that he is trying for the 3-star examination? Yuan Hong widened his eyes at that thought. If Zhong Xian wasn't out after clearing the 2-star examination, did that mean that he was attempting the subsequent 3-star examination? To still have the strength to attempt subsequent examinations after clearing the 2-star examination. What was that fellow made of? That should be the case. However, given the limited amount of time, it is impossible for him to clear the 3-star examination. Yuan Hong shook his head. As a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith, he knew how difficult smithing was. Even with his current skills, he would only be able to smith phantom low-tier weapons within 4 hours at best. Anything more than that was impossible. To clear the 1-star and 2-star examination, Zhong Xian would have to smith at least 2 weapons. However, no matter how proficient he was in smithing, he couldn't possibly be faster than a 6-star pinnacle blacksmith. As such, how could he possibly be able to smith the 3rd weapon? Let's just try giving it a press. Zhao Bingshu interjected as he walked up to the door and pressed on the button. Wang. Yet another flash of light and emblem. This, a 3-star emblem? Not only did Yuan Hong leap in shock, even Zhao Bingshu was stunned. To smith 3 weapons within 4 hours, advancing from an apprentice to a 3-star blacksmith. This speed was insane. Could it be possible that? The duo glanced at one another, only to see the shock in each other's eyes. Unable to stand the curiosity any longer, Yuan Hong pressed the button once more. Voila! Again, Another flash of light and another emblem. Yuan Hong swallowed his saliva and uttered hoarsely, 4-star. He is actually trying to clear up to the 5-star blacksmith examination within 4 hours. When that fellow said that he would challenge the 5-star blacksmith examination, Yuan Hong had regarded it as nothing more than a joke. After all, how could anyone advance from an apprentice to a 5-star blacksmith within a single day? But who could have thought that he would actually succeed? Since the 4-star emblem had appeared, it could only mean that he was currently attempting for the 5-star blacksmith examination. To smith 4 weapons within 4 hours, and not to mention, all 4 of them had to reach the required quality in order to clear the examination. How in the world was that fellow doing it? Xiong Bing, who had been watching the scene, couldn't help but ask, do you think that it's possible that he might have cleared the 5-star examination? That's impossible. Hearing those words, Yuan Hong immediately shook his head in denial. If he had cleared the 5-star examination, he would have been out by now. Why would he still be inside? But despite the words Yuan Hong was speaking, his hand still stretched out to press that button once again. Voila! And yet again, another emblem fell from the aperture. Grabbing it hurriedly, Yuan Hong rubbed his eyes and stared at the name and rank inscribed on the emblem, and his body began shaking intensely. A 5-star emblem. Feiqi has even cleared the 5-star blacksmith examination as well. TTT then, what examination is he taking at the moment? Yuan Hong felt as if everything he had known about the world was crumbling before his eyes, and tears threatened to spill down his cheeks. If they could apply for the 5-star emblem but that fellow wasn't out yet, didn't that mean that the fellow was attempting the 6-star blacksmith examination? But how could that be possible? Even if he had sufficient time to attempt it, his cultivation was too low to clear the examination. In order to become a 6-star blacksmith, one must be able to smith a spirit pinnacle weapon at the minimum, and in order to do so, the minimum cultivation one must possess was transcendent mortal 9-dan chrysalis rel. This was a well-known fact amongst blacksmiths. Until one had achieved a seamless body at transcendent mortal 9-dan chrysalis realm, the inadvertent leakage of zhenqi would result in imperfections in the smithing process, making it impossible to smith a spirit pinnacle weapon. For a weapon to reach spirit pinnacle, it had to be rich in spirit and nearly impeccable. If one couldn't even control one's body perfectly, how could one possibly forge such a weapon? Wang. In the midst of his shock, Yuan Hong subconsciously reached out to press the button once more, and with a flash of light, another emblem fell from the aperture again. 6-star. As if statues, everyone froze in place, and silence loomed before the ocean of weapons. Chapter 745. Accepting you as my teacher's disciple. Usually in the 4-hour time frame in the ocean of weapons, one would only be able to raise one's rank up by a single star. Yet, in a single seating, 6 emblems had been distributed by the ocean of weapons. This meant that, in a single breath, he cleared the examination from 1 star all the way to 6-star, and it was all a success. For a freshman with a Cosmos Bridge realm cultivation to actually clear the 6-star blacksmith examination, everyone couldn't help but tremble out of sheer agitation and shock. This was especially so for the female receptionist, Li Xian. Her eyes rolled up, and she nearly fainted on the spot. Through her conversation with him, she could tell that he possessed minimal knowledge of the blacksmith school at best. And yet, such a person actually cleared the 6-star blacksmith examination. She actually got impatient with a person who possessed the capability of a 6-star blacksmith. As such a thought flashed through her mind, she began shaking in fear. If there was a hole in the ground at this moment, she would dive in without any hesitation. On the other hand, Zhao Bingshu, Yuan Hong, and the other vice school heads also nearly blacked out. To forge 6 weapons within 4 hours to progress from a mere apprentice to a 6-star blacksmith. Was he still a human? School head, do you think that you would be able to do it as well? Yuan Hong couldn't help but ask with his quivering lips. School head Zhao boasted the greatest capability in smithing among them, and it was by a wide margin at that. If there was any one of them who could match that achievement, it would only be school head Zhao. After a moment of hesitation, Zhao Bingshu eventually shook his head. I couldn't do it either. Despite his superior smithing speed, it was impossible for him to complete 6 weapons within 6 hours. In truth, the smithing of lower-grade weapons didn't necessarily take less time than higher-quality weapons. It was true that lower-quality materials were easier to process, making the synthesis phase much easier. However, the forging phase was still likely to be extremely time-consuming. While the material would be easier to shape, special care had to be taken in order to ensure that the weapon didn't snap or deform. As such, the forging of the weapon still had to be done step by step. In such a case, his incredible strength as a saint didn't provide him much of an advantage. If he were to start from 1 star, 3 star would probably be his limit. Yet, that fellow actually reached 6 star in a single breath. Was this feat still humanly possible? Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Yuan Hong asked hesitantly, "Then, the matter regarding accepting him as your disciple?" That. A crimson tinge swiftly enveloped Zhao Bingshu's face as he found himself at a loss for words. He was still thinking a moment ago that he would accept the other party as his student and impart the essence of his comprehension of smithing to him, thus creating a beautiful legend for the blacksmith school. But, if that fellow was able to accomplish what he wasn't able to, he would only be humiliating himself if he were to ask the other party to be his student. Gee. While the both of them were stuck in a dilemma and the others were frozen in shock, the ocean of weapons doors abruptly opened, and the silhouette of a young man came into sight. At this moment, fatigue was written all over Zhong Xian's face, and his movements were sluggish. Even though he had recovered some of his strength inside through absorbing the spiritual energy in the high-tier spirit stone, he had still overexerted himself in the 6-star blacksmith examination. Ultimately, his current cultivation was only at Cosmos Bridge Realm Pinnacle. Even with the enhancement from Heaven's Path Shenqi and Heaven's Path Golden Body, he was still pushed to his very limits. Thus, after clearing the examination, he had to rest for a moment before he could muster the strength to stand up and leave. Nevertheless, it was fortunate that he had cleared the examination. At the current moment, he was already a quasi-6-star blacksmith. In the upper 9 paths occupations, unless special exceptions are given from the headquarters, as long as one's cultivation has yet to reach the required level, it could only be considered as a quasi-rank. Zhongsha. Yuan Hong walked over with admiration evident on his face. If he was still a little conflicted a moment ago due to the destruction of the various amenities, at this moment, he finally realized how wise the school head's decision was. To be able to pass the 6-star blacksmith examination with just a cultivation of Cosmos Bridge Realm, such talent had never been seen in the blacksmith school's thousands of years of history. Given sufficient time, he would surely become yet another Wu Yangzi of Hongyuan Empire. With such a figure in the blacksmith school, the reputation of the school would soar, and more talents would opt to join their ranks as well. Here is your emblem. Yuan Hong stepped forward and passed Zhong Xian his quasi-6-star emblem. Thank you. Taking the emblem, Zhong Xian nodded. At this moment, another elder with a bright smile on his face stepped forward. Zhongsha, I am Zhao Bingshu. Zhao Bingshu? Zhong Xian glanced at Yuan Hong doubtfully. This name sounded extremely foreign to him. He didn't know anyone who went by such a name. Looking at the puzzled expression on Zhong Xian's face, the master teachers in the area staggered. You came to the blacksmith school to challenge its examinations, but you don't know who the school head is. That's really enough of you. Li Xian could also feel tears pouring down her face. She'd thought that Zhong Xian was only ignorant of the rules of the academy, but it turned out that he was ignorant of everything. Yet, it was such an ignorant person who cleared the 6-star blacksmith examination, bringing the school head and vice-school heads here just to meet him personally. On the other hand, she could only serve as a humble receptionist in the blacksmith school. Truly, how could the difference between two humans be so great? Knowing that the young man before him truly didn't know of the Zhao Bingshu's identity, Yuan Hong hurriedly explained, Zhao Shi is the head of the blacksmith school, one of the 10 great master teachers. Hearing those words, Zhong Xian clasped his fist and greeted him. Zhong Xian pays respect to school head Zhao. While he had successfully cleared the 6-star blacksmith examination, there was still a huge gap between him and the head of the blacksmith school and a member of the 10 great master teachers. It's okay, there's no need to stand on ceremony, Zhongsha. It is heartening to see a man as young as you clear the 6-star blacksmith examination. Seeing the young man retaining his humility despite his astounding achievement, Zhao Bingshu nodded in commendation. "Thank you for your polite words, I was just lucky," Zhong Xian quickly replied. With his current cultivation, it was extremely difficult for him to smith a spirit pinnacle weapon. If not for a fair bit of luck here and there, he would still be a 5-star blacksmith at this moment. Luck favors the diligent and capable. It is rare to see a person who can still remain level-headed in the face of success. "I can see why Luo Chichi and the others are in awe of you," Zhao Bingshu said as he stroked his beard. He was getting more and more fond of the young man before him. Too many times he had seen young geniuses with their heads in the skies due to just a few accomplishments here and there. On the other hand, the young man didn't allow his success to go to his head. It seemed like his smithing ability wasn't just the only aspect of him that was admirable, his mental fortitude was incredible as well. If he could accept such a genius as his disciple, his reputation would surely soar. However, considering that the other party's skills were not beneath his, it would be unlikely for the other party to accept it. After a moment of hesitation, Zhao Bingshu smiled and said, "Zhongshe, your talent in smithing is unmatched by any in the younger generation. However, if you wish to reach greater heights, you must have someone to guide and correct you. With my shallow grasp of smithing, I dare not ask you to become my student. However, if you wish, in the stead of my teacher, I hope to accept you as his student." "Accept me as your teacher's student?" Zhong Xian was taken aback. "That's right. My teacher is a 7-star master teacher in Qingyuan Conferred Empire, and he possesses great prestige there. I'm sure he would be more than glad to have a talented blacksmith like you as his student." Zhao Bingshu replied. "School head Zhao will accept that fellow as his teacher's student in place of his teacher? If that were to happen, does that mean that Zhongshe would be school head Zhao's junior? To become the junior of one of the 10 great master teachers, the student of a 7-star blacksmith. Regardless of which title it is, there will be no one who will dare to stand in his way in the academy. This is amazing." Hearing the conversation between the duo, an uproar broke out amidst the master teachers in the area. Even Yuan Hong had nearly fell to the ground from shock. He already found it shocking to hear of school head Zhao's intentions to take Zhongshe in as his student, but for him to become his junior instead. This was madness. If Zhongshe were to accept that offer, wouldn't that mean that he would be a peer to them? For a grade 1 student who hadn't even received his student token yet to become the school head's junior. Yuan Hong, Xiong Bing, and the others glanced at one another with bulging eyes. But as insane as this matter sounded, Zhongshe had already shown that he was qualified for that. To advance from an apprentice to 6-star in a single breath. This had never ever been done before, and this record would likely remain unbroken for ages to come. Perhaps the unfathomable sage clans in the conferred empires might be capable of such a feat, but one thing was for sure, this feat was beyond everyone in the Master Teacher Academy. Not expecting that there would be another person who would attempt to take him in as his student once more in the same day, this time in the stead of his teacher, Zhong Xian sighed deeply for a moment before shaking his head. "I am truly apologetic, but I already have a teacher named Yang Xian. For the time being, I don't intend to acknowledge any teachers." If Zhong Xian were to accept the other party's offer, he might find several restrictions imposed on him. At the same time, he could easily accumulate any required knowledge by reading through books. There was no need for him to learn from another. He rejected the offer. That was an opportunity to become school head Zhao's junior. The world has gone mad, truly mad. An opportunity to become the student of the school head is something that countless have dreamed of, and yet he rejected an offer to become his junior. Slap me, I want to see if I am dreaming. Rejecting an offer to become a student of a 7-star master teacher, what else does he want? Everyone became petrified upon hearing that rejection. Countless here had laughed heartily when granted the opportunity of becoming school head Zhao's student, only to wake up and realize in dejection that it was just a dream. Yet, that fellow wasn't even willing to become school head Zhao's junior. "Why don't you just ascend to the heavens?" At this moment, Luo Yang's body was trembling in agitation, and he nearly fell to the ground weakly. He had sneaked out from his quarters, And it was only after seeing this scene that he realized why his teacher's attitude would change so abruptly. A junior of one of the 10 great master teachers. Just this title itself was deserving of Yuan Hong's respect. But what that left him tugging his hair in frenzy was that fellow rejected that offer. Screw that. Big brother, let's negotiate about this matter. Why don't we switch places? Or rather, it's fine if I can become your disciple too. You aren't willing? Zhao Bingshu was stupefied as well. He had already gone this far, accepting that fellow as his teacher's disciple out of fear that he wouldn't be willing to become his student, but who could have known that he would be disagreeable to that as well? Don't you know that a formidable teacher means strong backing as well? Do you understand the kind of privileges and authority you will gain the academy due to that? School head Zhao, thank you for your high appraisal of me. Zhong Xian bowed. He had an indifferent expression on his face, but the truth was that his heart was bleeding at this moment. He had already crafted Yang Shu as an unparalleled expert of the world. After all that had been said and done, he had little choice but to go on with his lie. If he were to take another as his teacher so easily, what would that say about Yang Shu? How could he convince others that Yang Shu was at least an 8-star master teacher when his direct disciple would take even a 7-star master teacher as his teacher? He would have no choice but to swallow the bitter fruit he had sowed. I guess I was being a little too hasty. Seeing the other party's determined attitude, Zhao Bingshu sighed deeply. Pardon me for my ignorance, but may I know who Yang Shu is? Since Zhong Shu could even reject the opportunity to become a student of a 7-star master teacher, it could only mean to say that Yang Shu was a formidable master teacher himself. But if that was the case, why hadn't he heard of the other party before? My teacher seeks a carefree life wandering the lands, not wanting to be tied down by fame. As such, there are very few who know of his name. Zhong Xian chuckled. After a moment of pondering, Zhao Bingshu clasped his fist. I am interested in paying respect to the master teacher who is capable of grooming such an outstanding student. May I trouble Zhong Shu to extend my regards to him? You wish to meet my teacher? Zhong Xian froze. Indeed. You are an incredible genius, and I think that it's a pity if we simply leave your talent for smithing be. It's normal for a master teacher to have several teachers in his lifetime, and even Kongsha himself acknowledged quite a few people as his teacher, Tanshu, Li Shu. Thus, I wish to meet Yang Shu and discuss this matter with him. If we just impart the art of smithing to you, there shouldn't be a conflict of interest. Zhao Bingshu said. Chapter 746, Zhong Xian's Flaw R. Zhong Xian scratched his head. It seemed like the other party was truly determined to have him become his junior. However, despite the various benefits that could come from the opportunity, he still thought that it was better for him to turn down the deal. The privileges would come with a set of responsibilities, and he wasn't willing to bear them. Since Yang Shu is also one of our own, surely it should be fine for us to just meet. Zhao Bingshu stroked his beard. He was indeed interested in meeting the teacher behind such an outstanding student. The truth is that my teacher has no fixed lodging, so I don't know where he is at the moment either. However, I'll make sure to relay your intentions to him the next time I meet him, said Zhong Xian with a conflicted expression. What the heck is this? All I wanted to do was to read my books patiently, take all of the required examinations, and leave dashingly. Who could have known that everyone I met would be so intent on taking me as their student or their junior? Do I look like an easy man? Seems like it's about time to have Yang Shu make an appearance. Otherwise, if the 10 great master teachers visit me one after another, how can I read my books in peace? I want to keep a low profile, you know. All right, that's a promise then. Zhao Bingshu chuckled. School head Zhao and the other vice school heads, I have overexerted myself in the 6-star blacksmith examination, so I would like to return to my residence to rest. I'll be taking my leave now. Fearing that Zhao Bingshu would continue asking him about Yang Shu's affairs and put him on the spot, Zhong Xian clasped his fist. Right, you must be drained by now. You should quickly return and have a good rest. It must be exhausting to forge 6 weapons in 4 hours. Let's talk tomorrow then. It was only after hearing those words that it struck Zhao Bingshu, Yuan Hong, and the others that the young man before them had just finished forging 6 weapons. In a moment of agitation, it had slipped their minds. It was indeed rude of them to keep the other party with them when he was already on the verge of collapsing. Thank you. Hearing their agreement, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. However, just as he was about to leave, Zhao Bingshu's voice sounded once more. Since you have just joined the academy, you must be staying at the shared dormitory at the moment. Here is my personal token. Get yourself a residence in the elite sector with this. This will make it more convenient for us to meet and talk. As he said those words, school head Zhao took out a token similar to the one Elder Mo had given him previously and proffered it to Zhongxian. Back at the school head's office, Yuan Hong had only spoken about how Zhongxian had destroyed the passageway of records. He didn't mention that the latter had Elder Mo's token in hand. Besides, Zhao Bingshu clearly intended this as a gesture of goodwill to get on the good side of this rising talent. Were it not for Yuan Hong's own personal token commanding less authority than the 10 great master teachers, he would have wanted to give his own to Zhongshe as well. This. Zhongxian blinked in surprise. Take it. My token should bring you some convenience in the academy. Zhao Bingshu nodded, indicating that it was fine for him to accept the gift. Thank you, school head Zhao. At the other party's insistence, Zhongxian accepted the token. He had already rejected the other party's offer once, so it would be disrespectful of him to turn down this gift as well. However, as the crowd saw the look of reluctance on Zhongxian's face as he accepted Zhao Bingshu's token, their mouths twitched violently, and they nearly burst into tears. One must know that it would be difficult for an average student to even meet school head Zhao. School head Zhao had come personally to meet that fellow, and not only did he reject the offer to become his junior, he was even unwilling to accept the token. Where did this freak come from? Did he know how many of them wanted to pummel him to death right then because of that reluctance on his face? I'll be taking my leave then. Taking the token, Zhongxian immediately turned around and left. Before long, he had already disappeared over the horizon. It sure is a huge pity. Watching as Zhongxian's silhouette disappear, Zhao Bingshu shook his head. A pity? Yuan Hong asked, uncomprehending of Zhao Bingshu's words. Zhongshe is an incredible genius. Despite his politeness, I can still see the pride in his eyes. It will be hard to win him over with material gains. It will be nigh impossible to retain him in the blacksmith school. Zhao Bingshu sighed. You're right. After a moment of contemplation, Yuan Hong nodded as well. That was an opportunity to become school head Zhao's junior, but he still rejected it without much hesitation. As such, what else could the blacksmith school offer him? Surely there wasn't anything as attractive as that. Let's just take a step at a time and see what we can do. In any case, make sure to treat him with respect and don't offend him, Zhao Bingshu said. After which, he turned his eyes to the ocean of weapons and said, Yuan Hong and Xiong Bing, follow me in. I am really interested to see how he managed to forge 6 weapons in 4 hours. Even Zhao Bingshu himself had to concede that it was impossible for him to forge 6 weapons and advance from an apprentice to a 6-star master teacher within 4 hours. How did a Cosmos Bridge Realm blacksmith accomplish a feat that was even beyond him? Yes. Yuan Hong and Xiong Bing nodded. In truth, they harbored the same doubts as well. Thus, the group pushed open the towering doors of the ocean of weapons and walked in. As the head of the blacksmith school, Zhao Bingshu wielded special privileges that allowed him to enter the ocean of weapons even without using academic credits. Let's look at the recordings of the examination, Zhao Bingshu said as he flicked his finger. Wang. The ocean of weapons whirred into action, and Zhongxian's figure from a moment ago, when he was still taking the examination, appeared before the group's eyes. There was a special installation in the ocean of weapons that allowed it to record the happenings in the examinations and replay it, so that others could study and learn from outstanding examinees. Who? Under the gazes of the group, Zhongxian casually grabbed a couple of ores and metals and threw it into the furnace. After which, he retrieved them and synthesized them together before tossing it into the quenching fluid straight. This. He went straight into quenching without forging the weapon? Everyone froze in shock. However, forging is indeed the most time-consuming phase in the smithing of a weapon. He could indeed save himself a lot of time through skipping it. This is a brilliant idea. Why didn't I think of it? Zhao Bingshu's eyes glowed in excitement as he slapped his thigh. Of the 3 phases of smithing, the most arduous and complicated procedure was, without doubt, hammering the ingot into its intended shape. If one could skip this step, one could indeed save a fair bit of time. However, could the product of this smithing still be considered a weapon? Soon, they saw Zhong Xian retrieving a metal lump from the quenching fluid before placing it on the grading pedestal. After which, he cleared the examination. To think that a mere alloy which hasn't undergone hammering yet could reach phantom low tier. Incredible. Xiongbing nodded in commendation. It was not without reason that weapons were called creations under 1,000 hammerings. The purpose of the forging phase wasn't just to shape the weapon but to strike out the impurities in the weapon and balance out the alloy as well, thus enhancing its quality. Yet, without a single hammering, that fellow was able to make a mere metal lump achieve the quality worthy of being deemed as a weapon. Even as 6-star pinnacle blacksmiths, none of them were capable of doing the same. To craft such a perfect alloy would require a thorough understanding of every single property of the ores and metal, so as to determine the temperature of the furnace, the timing of the synthesis, and deduce the reaction from the synthesis. On top of that, he has to work on the metals and ores simultaneously in the synthesis process while controlling the heat in the furnace through his zhenqi. To be able to multitask that well, it could only mean that he has a powerful soul as well. Furthermore, to be able to remain unfazed at such proximity to the furnace, and even grab the searing alloy barehanded. How powerful must his physical body be? His movements are fluid, devoid of the slightest hesitation. This goes to say that he possesses mental fortitude, allowing him to move confidently without allowing doubt to hinder him. The longer they watched, the more astonished the group became. Synthesizing the metals and ores into an alloy and quenching it straight after, they could easily do the same as well. However, it was a different question whether they would be able to clear the examination with what they created. In fact, even the legendary Grandmaster Blacksmith, Wu Yangzi, didn't seem to be capable of this feat. Was that fellow really an inheritor of Wu Yangzi's heritage and not his teacher? Soon, they reached the 6-star blacksmith examination simulation. With each flick of a finger, a melodious metallic ring sounded. Before long, a massive metal hammer appeared before Zhong Xian. Is this really a weapon forged by a blacksmith? Judging by how skillful that young man was in his hammering, they'd thought that the end product would astound them, just as he had done many times before. Who would have thought that his work would turn out to be so hideous? Are you sure that it is a metal hammer and not a steel tower? Everyone glanced at one another speechlessly. After watching the entire examination, Zhao Bingshu couldn't help but remark, it seems like Zhong Shi does possess great talent, but his forging skills are still a little lacking. Lacking is an understatement. It is as if he has never learnt hammering before. Yuan Hong shook his head. Honestly speaking, not even an apprentice blacksmith would create a hammer as terrible as his. Flame control, synthesis, quenching. All of these, Zhong Shi had perfect grasp over. Yet, why would he simply fail so utterly in the hammering phase? One must know that this was actually the simplest phase of the entire smithing process. It could easily be mastered through repetition. But this works to our advantage as well. We can use this opportunity to teach him and rally him to our blacksmith school. Zhao Bingshu smiled. He was still thinking about how he could win Zhong Xian over and tie him down to the blacksmith school when this opportunity appeared before him. With this, he could step forward and guide the other party along, thus making him indebted to the blacksmith school. Yes, that's a good idea. The other vice school heads also nodded in agreement as well. Their only fear was that Zhong Xian would have no flaws at all. As long as he had a flaw, they could use it as an impetus to approach him and build a close relationship with him. Once he started learning from one of them, it would just be a matter of time before he was tied down to their ship. On the other hand, after returning to his residence in the elite sector, fatigue finally set into Zhong Xian's body, leaving him feeling weak throughout. While he did cut some corners in his work, it still hadn't been an easy feat for him to smith 6 weapons within 4 hours. His zhenqi was depleted, and his spirit and soul were worn out. If not for his soul having broken the 10 meters bottleneck, he might have just collapsed in the midst of the examination. I didn't have a chance to examine it before, but it seems my soul has undergone a qualitative change after breaking the 10 meters bottleneck. After absorbing some spiritual energy from his high-tier spirit stone to recharge, Zhongxian suddenly recalled a matter. Back in the chamber of earth flame, when his soul had successfully overcome the 10 meters bottleneck, he vividly felt some changes in his soul. However, with the chamber collapsing on him right afterward and the various troubles afterward, he hadn't had the opportunity to check on it yet. Since he had some time now, it would be good for him to see what was going on. His soul, physical body, and zhenqi, these were the three factors that stood at the foundation of his strength. Through past experience, he'd learned that it was essential for him to maintain a perfect grasp of his condition so as to avoid any unfortunate mishaps. Activating the formation around him to block out any prying eyes, Zhongxian sat on the ground and closed his eyes. His soul left his body. At this moment, his soul was as enormous as a giant. Even with his feet on the ground, his head could still easily reach the roof of the residence. Introspection. Zhongxian activated the Eye of Insight to view the situation in his soul. What is this? How is this possible? Upon first glance, Zhongxian suddenly froze, and shocked exclamations escaped from his mouth. Chapter 747, Return of the Innate Fetal Poison. Under the discerning gaze of the Eye of Insight, Zhongxian could see a thin grey line floating amidst his massive soul. It resembled a parasite, leaving him with an ominous feeling within. This is the innate fetal poison? Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. Even back when he was still in Tianxian Kingdom, he had already noticed the innate fetal poison in him. However, as he began to cultivate the Heaven's Path divine art, the poison was suppressed by the Heaven's Path zhenqi, thus crippling it for the time being. As time passed, he began to pay less and less heed to it. Based on his previous investigation, he should be able to resolve the problem by becoming a 9-star master teacher before the age of 30. Who could have known that the innate fetal poison would actually slip into his soul? He could suppress the innate fetal poison in his physical body through his Heaven's Path zhenqi, but how was he supposed to deal with it in his soul? Zhongxian's face turned livid. A soul was the foundation of a human's consciousness. Its destruction would spell irreversible death for one. Zhongxian was still previously harboring the thought of focusing on the cultivation of his soul such that even if he was unable to resolve his innate fetal poison, he could at least still live on as a soul. But from the looks of it, this idea was impossible now. Unknowingly, the treacherous poison had managed to seep into his soul. As his soul was too weak before, he wasn't able to perceive it. However, as his soul broke the 10 meters bottleneck and grew even stronger and more sensitive, he finally noticed that something was amiss. Or perhaps, has the innate fetal poison been in my soul from the very start? The innate fetal poison was planted in him back when he was nothing more than a fetus in his mother's womb. Given how vulnerable he was then, it shouldn't have been too difficult for it to spread from his body to his soul, or vice versa. However, considering how it had been some time since he'd become a soul oracle, it didn't seem quite possible for him to have never noticed the innate fetal poison in his soul all along. It was as if that congregation of innate fetal poison had been invisible to him all along, or could it be that it was simply too weak for him to perceive then? If that was the case, could it mean that the innate fetal poison was leeching off his soul, growing along with it? What should I do? Will the innate fetal poison work up earlier if I continue cultivating my soul? Zhongxian thought grimly. Without the Heaven's Path zhenqi, it would be difficult for him to suppress the innate fetal poison. If the poison in his soul were to trigger, he would be helpless before it. What the heck was this? The other protagonists that transcend to another world were either top-notch geniuses or given overpowered artifacts that allowed them to dominate the world. It was one thing for him to have been born with average talent, but he was even given such a gift from the world. What crime did he commit in his previous life to deserve this? While the soul of Heaven's Path was indeed powerful, it shared one common trait with the other souls: it was incapable of harnessing zhenqi, and this included the Heaven's Path zhenqi as well. Without the Heaven's Path zhenqi to suppress the innate fetal poison, it would be able to do as it pleased in his soul. In other words, his life and death hinged on the whim of that monstrosity, unless I can find something to suppress it. If his heaven's path Shinchi couldn't help him suppress the innate fetal poison in his soul, he would just have to find something else that could. Otherwise, if that monstrosity were to get into a bad mood and wreak havoc, he might just die a premature death. It wouldn't do to simply bank his fate on luck. Soul Oracle is the occupation that specializes in the topic of souls. I have received Mo Huansheng's heritage, but there isn't any method for me to suppress the innate fetal poison in there. Furthermore, the heritage of soul oracles has been wiped out by the Master-Teacher Pavilion, so it's unlikely that I'll be able to find a solution from there. Zhong Xian contemplated. If he wanted to find something to suppress the innate fetal poison in his soul, he would have to first find something compatible with his soul. To do so, he would first have to deepen his understanding regarding souls. However, with the heritage of the number one occupation specializing in the study of souls extinct, he could only try to find another substitute for it. Of the 10 schools in the Master-Teacher Academy, the supporting occupations that can influence one's soul are painter, demonic tunist, and terpsichore. Painting can calm hearts and build conception, but it possesses no offensive capability whatsoever. On the other hand, demonic tunist and terpsichore can beguile hearts and destroy souls. Thus, I should focus on the latter two instead. The other supporting occupations such as beast tamer, blacksmith, celestial designer, and physicians had little regarding the study of souls. At this point, the only two occupations which could possibly help Zhong Xian were demonic tunist and terpsichore. Those two occupations specialized in the beguilement of souls, so they should have a sizable collection regarding the study of souls. Yuan, I will pay those two schools a visit when dawn comes. Time waited for no one. Every day he waited meant an additional day where he could be killed by the innate fetal poison. However, it was already nearing midnight, so it was unlikely that their facilities would still be open. Thus, it would better for him to head there after daybreak. Even though there was an event in the academy tomorrow, in which the teachers of the academy would accept students under their tutelage, it didn't make a difference to him whether he went there or not. After all, if he intended to seek a teacher, he would have already accepted Zhao Bingshu's offer to become his junior. It would be pointless for him to reject that offer and seek a normal teacher instead. Even if a student was left without a teacher at the end of the event, it wasn't the end of the world for him. For one, he could still attend public lessons. Besides, Zhong Xian's main goal for coming to the Master-Teacher Academy was to access the collection of books in here. In view of that, it didn't matter whether he had the guidance of a teacher or not. I don't think I can sleep tonight. I guess I shall take a look at how Wang Ying and the others are doing. With the issue regarding the innate fetal poison weighing down his mind, it was unlikely that he would be able to rest. Since that was the case, he might as well take a look at how his students and butler were doing and provide them some guidance on their cultivation. Otherwise, they might find themselves lagging too far behind Yuan Dao, Zhao Ya, and Lu Chong. Thus, Zhong Xian stood up and walked out of his room. Turbid clouds shrouded the night sky, and not a single star or the moon was to be seen. Even on such a dark night, it would be too conspicuous for him to travel using the red dust heaven ascending steps, especially since there were sentries keeping a lookout for the aerial space in the academy given the presence of Saint Realm experts in the city. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to summon the great violet wing beast. There were quite a few students in the academy who bore the beast tamer occupation, so aerial spirit beasts were allowed to travel to and fro unrestricted grounds in the academy. Leaping onto the back of the aerial spirit beast, Zhong Xian flew out of the academy. Before heading to Leiyuan Peak, Sun Qiong had already found a residence, and he had informed Zhong Xian of the address as well. After a couple minutes of flight, a small residence soon came into sight. This residence was only a few hundred meters square large, significantly smaller than the previous one they'd stayed in. Nevertheless, in Hongyuan City where every inch of ground was worth a fortune, it must have taken a huge deal of effort to find a residence of this size. Just as Zhong Xian was about to leap down from the great violet wing beast's back, he suddenly frowned. Eye of insight. With a sharp gaze, he surveyed his surroundings. Soon, he saw a few shadows hidden inconspicuously in the shadows around the residence, seemingly up to no good. They are all ethereal treading realm experts. While they had done a good job concealing their trail, they were still unable to fool the eye of insight. Zhongxian could feel immense power lying dormant in their bodies, as if a crouching mighty dragon. Astonishingly, they were all transcendent mortal 8-dan expert. Why would such experts be lurking around his residence? Could it be that they meant Sun Qiong and the others harm? We have just arrived here, and Sun Qiong and the others have nothing much of fortune on them either. How did they catch the eye of such experts? While ethereal treading realm cultivators weren't the top-tier power in Hongyuan City, they were definitely considered experts here. For so many experts to surround a small residence, what could they be up to? Surely Sun Qiong and the others didn't have any possession on them that could attract their attention. Forget it, this is a good opportunity to try out my new strength. A glint flashed across Zhongxian's eyes. At Leiyuan Peak, he had managed to advance his cultivation to Cosmos Bridge Realm Pinnacle, resulting in his Zhenqi strength rising to 8 million ding. In the Chamber of Earth Flame, he had managed to achieve second incandescence in the quintuple incandescence golden body, thus enhancing his overall physical strength to 8 million ding as well. Factoring in the 3,200,000 ding of strength from his soul cultivation, the overall might he could harness added up to almost 20 million ding. This granted him the strength to fight with ethereal treading realm advanced stage experts on equal ground. Since those fellows seemed to be up to no good, there shouldn't be any trouble using them as punching bags. Who? With a leap, Zhongxian descended from the back of the great violet wing beast. Since the great violet wing beast was maintaining a high altitude in the sky, the several men hidden in the shadows didn't seem to notice Zhongxian. Zhongxian drove his Zhenqi and activated the red dust heaven ascending step. As if a light feather, he slowly drifted down amidst the cloak of the night sky. I should start from the weakest. There was a total of 4 men hidden in the area, and the weakest of them was at ethereal treading realm primary stage. Silently, as if an apparition, Zhongxian's figure floated stealthily toward the masked man hidden behind an ancient tree. By cloaking his vitals with his Heaven's Path Zhenqi, he was able to erase his presence such that not even a chrysalis realm expert would be able to notice him. He silently gathered his strength on his palm and pressed it against the masked man. The masked man behind the ancient tree felt an abrupt jolt on his back before immense might began gushing through his body, sealing every single one of his meridians. Putong. The next moment, he was already lying on the ground, unconscious. Oh, this isn't as difficult as I thought it would be, Zhongxian muttered. It was just a day ago that he was still completely powerless before an ethereal treading realm expert, but at this moment, he could already incapacitate them without much effort. After knocking the first one out, he turned his gaze toward his second target and slowly made his way over. The target this time around was an ethereal treading realm intermediate stage expert. He was slightly warier, and Zhongxian was discovered before he could make his way to him. Just as he was able to exclaim to warn his other comrades, he suddenly felt an extremely heavy pressure pushing on his soul, rendering him incapable of speech. It was an assault on his soul. While he was an ethereal treading realm expert, he was far weaker than Zhongxian when it came to the prowess of their souls. As a result, he was paralyzed for half a second. It was a short moment, but a moment was all it took to overwhelm an opponent in a battle. Who? Executing the same palm strike, the second target was also knocked unconscious. Even at the point when his consciousness faded, he wasn't able to see the face of his assailant. It was easier for these two because they are weaker, but it probably won't so as smoothly for the remaining 2. After knocking out 2 of the 4 targets, Zhongxian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. In terms of absolute strength, the 2 he had knocked out were weaker than him. However, the remaining 2 were at ethereal treading realm advanced stage and pinnacle respectively, and this meant that both their cultivation and absolute strength were higher than his. As such, it wouldn't be easy for him to assault them and knock them out as easily as the other 2. It'll be troublesome if they band together upon noticing my presence. I should clear one of them as fast as I can first. While it would be difficult to strike out the remaining targets with a single strike, he should be able to overwhelm his opponent swiftly using the element of surprise as long as he attacked decisively. Thus, he pushed his foot powerfully against the ground. With movements as swift as lightning, He rushed straight for the ethereal treading realm advanced stage masked man. Heaven's Path movement art. Zhongxian's movements were so fast that one could only barely see a shadow flitting across the darkness. What? The huge gale raked up by the Heaven's Path movement art alarmed the remaining two targets. The ethereal treading realm advanced stage masked man whom Zhongxian was aiming for narrowed his eyes, and cold sweat suddenly began trickling down his back. However, it was already too late for him to do anything. Just as he was about to flee, a fist was already heading straight for his solar plexus. Peng! This punch harnessed the great momentum of the Heaven's Path movement art and the immense strength of the Heaven's Path fist art, creating an overwhelming might that couldn't be opposed. Pu. Before the masked man could react, he was already struck squarely by the fist. Fresh blood spewed from his mouth as he flew a dozen meters away, striking head first into a massive boulder before passing out. Chapter 748. Spirit Emporium. You are seeking death, the final masked man howled. He didn't expect to be assaulted here, and his face turned livid. Clenching his jaw, he drove his junchi, and the powerful aura of an ethereal treading realm pinnacle expert gushed from his body. Who? The masked man raised his hands, and his junchi suddenly flooded the area. In an instant, the air around Zhongxian grew viscous. There was an immense resistance against every single movement he made, resulting in a huge dip in his movement speed. His strength didn't pale too far in comparison to the other party, but due to the difference in their cultivation, and thus the comprehension of nature, his ability in utilizing junchi was far beneath the other parties. In a battle, this would pose as a significant disadvantage. In other words, while he could stand toe-to-toe with an ethereal treading realm expert in a direct clash of strength, he was still severely handicapped in a proper battle. Break. But even so, Zhongxian wouldn't allow himself to be defeated without any resistance. Gathering his strength, he abruptly kicked forward. Voila! Under the immense force nearing 20 million ding, the junchi spatial lockdown shattered like a broken mirror. Who? Activating the Heaven's Path movement art once more, Zhongxian charged right up to the masked man. Hua-la! A fist as tough as adamantium shot forth for the masked man. Humph! After the first clash, the masked man could already see that his opponent's cultivation was only at Cosmos Bridge Realm Pinnacle. While the other party might have raised his strength significantly through some unknown means, it was still a far way from reaching up to him, an ethereal treading realm pinnacle expert. There was no way he could lose to a Cosmos Bridge Realm opponent. Gathering his junchi in his arms, he struck back with a palm strike. Hua-la! His hand carried great might that seemed to be more than capable of collapsing mountains. Spirit high-tier battle technique, mountain collapsing palm. In a moment of daze, it felt as if the heaven and earth had dimmed in the face of this palm. Even if his opponent was another ethereal treading realm pinnacle expert, he was confident he could overpower the other party easily. This was the strongest battle technique he had up his sleeves. The bizarre means of the fellow before him had sent warning bells ringing in his head, so he decided to use his strongest technique right from the get-go. He thought that he would be able to send that fellow flying in an instant with this strike, incapacitating him. But who knew that before his palm could even reach, he would hear the other party's excited voice. A head-on confrontation? Great. Following which, the young man before him agilely dodged to his left. Upon seeing this maneuver, the masked man's soul nearly fled his body from fright. The other party's hand was headed right for where the Ming men of his mountain collapsing palm was located. Every technique had its own flaws, this was something inevitable. However, as long as one were to move with sufficient speed, one could prevent one's opponent from exploiting one's weaknesses. As such, in a battle among experts, it was rare to see the striking of Ming men. However, it was as if that fellow had known the flaws of his mountain collapsing palm from the very start, moving right into his blind spot to strike his Ming men as soon as he began executing the technique. Putting aside how he knew the Ming men of his technique, to be able to recognize it and react instantaneously, how deep of an understanding of the mountain collapsing palm must he possess? However, at this crucial moment, he had no time to process his shock at all. His rapidly twitching eyes saw the young man's finger leisurely reaching for the weakness in his technique, but due to the immense momentum from his offense, he couldn't move away at all. Pu. It was just a light jab, but his body was immediately sent flying into his distance. His junchi was sent into disarray, and fresh blood spurted from his mouth like a fountain. Eventually, he struck a tree and fell to the ground. That jab had precisely struck the center of his flow of junchi, sending the junchi in his body into a devastating rampage instantaneously, tearing apart his meridians and acupoints. Even if he were to recover from his injury, his cultivation was pretty much crippled at this point. Sensing the changes in his body, tears flowed down the masked man's face. He had practiced the mountain collapsing palm to a very high level, making it difficult for his opponent to notice the flaws in his technique. How in the world did that fellow find it and even strike it precisely without the slightest deviation? If only he'd known that such a situation would occur, he would have never used the mountain collapsing palm against that young fellow. After knocking out all four of them, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief and instructed, "All right, bring those fellows to me." Roar. Hearing the orders, the great violet-winged beast immediately got into action. "Young master, you're here." "Teacher." Sun Qiong, Zhang Yang, Wang Ying, and the others rushed out upon hearing the ruckus outside, and they immediately saw Zhongxian's silhouette beneath the night sky. The group walked into the residence, and after taking a seat, Zhongxian asked with a frown, "Right, did you offend anyone in the capital or cause any trouble somewhere?" "Offend anyone? Cause trouble? We didn't." Sun Qiong replied. "If you didn't do anything, why would 4 ethereal treading realm experts be lurking around the residence?" Zhongxian questioned sternly. 4 ethereal treading realm experts. Upon hearing those words, Sun Qiong immediately leaped in shock. At that moment, Putong, a stack of bodies, was suddenly tossed at the doorway of the main hall by the great violet-winged beast. "Take a look yourself." Zhongxian pointed to the doorway. Sun Qiong walked to the doorway and examined the faces of those masked men before shaking his head in confusion. "I don't recognize any of these men. If you don't know them, why would they be loitering around our residence?" However, what Zhongxian faced was only the bewildered gazes of his students and butler. Thus, he sighed deeply and waved his hands. "Bring them in." Roar. The 4 men were lifted and dumped into the main hall. As they had been fighting in the dark previously, Zhongxian didn't have an opportunity to examine the profile of his opponents. Under the illumination from the night illumination pearls in the room, he saw 4 middle-aged men, seemingly in their 40s. They had a dark skin tone and a large physique. "Who are you? Why are you lurking around this residence?" Zhongxian turned to the ethereal treading realm pinnacle cultivator, the only one conscious of the 4, and harumphed. "We were just passing by this area. We didn't mean to alarm you," the other party replied. "Passing by?" Seeing how the other party was still trying to deny the matter, a sharp glint flashed across Zhongxian's eyes as he waved his hands and instructed, "Kill them and toss their bodies outside the city." He was already in a bad mood, and that fellow still dared to play games with him. Courting death. Zhongxian wasn't fond of bloodshed, but he didn't mind staining his hands with the blood of those who dared to threaten the lives of his students and butler. Roar. Hearing the command, the great violet-winged beast immediately nodded in excitement. With a deafening roar, its talon swiped right for the 4 men. If it were to land on them, their heads would surely explode on the spot. "Dididonti, kill me. I'll speak. I'll speak." The lack of hesitation from the young man before him in ordering for their deaths sent a cold chill down the man's spine. "I was only obeying orders from my master. I beg of you to spare my life." The man knew that he would never get an opportunity to speak again if he didn't speak now, so he immediately gave in. "Orders? Whose?" Zhongxian asked. "The Spirit Emporium." The man replied. "Spirit Emporium?" Zhongxian frowned. He had never heard of that place before, so why would the other party go after him? "You are from the Spirit Emporium?" Sun Qiong froze for an instant before clasping his fist toward Zhongxian. "Young master, the Spirit Emporium is a shop in Hongyuan City which deals with artifacts. Just today, I visited its storefront." "You visited the Spirit Emporium?" Zhongxian asked questioningly. "Yes. After all, we are a little short on money at the moment. Thus, I thought of selling the treasures you have gathered from Huanyu Empire to tide us through this period, and after asking around, I eventually found the Spirit Emporium, Sun Qiong explained. Back in Huanyu Empire's mystical treasure hall, he had acquired quite a few artifacts, but he hadn't found an opportunity to sell them so far. However, with their finances running low, Sun Qiong had no choice but to sell those artifacts. Who would have thought that he would end up drawing eyes to their group? I see. After asking a few more questions, Zhongxian soon got a clear grasp of the situation. Even though the Spirit Emporium appeared to be a proper business on the surface, it was in fact a black market headed by a dangerous organization. Through their official business, they were able to find potential targets which their members could rob from to earn easy bucks. Sun Qiong, Zheng Yang, and the others possessed weak cultivation, but they carried immense wealth with them. How could the Spirit Emporium possibly let such an easy target go? Thus, the Spirit Emporium dispatched these 4 men for them. The main role of these 4 men was to scout their targets to ensure that there were no experts in their midst. If the targets were within their capability, they would then conduct an attack and plunder their wealth. How dare they try to rob my students and butler? They must be tired of living. Zhongxian's face darkened. They should already be thanking the gods that he hadn't brought destruction upon their organization yet, but to think that they would be so brazen as to lay their eyes on his students and butler instead. Zhongxian turned to Sun Qiong and asked, "Where is the Spirit Emporium?" "It isn't too far from here. It should be a 10-minute journey on foot," Sun Qiong replied. "All right then. Make preparations, we'll pay them a visit at dawn," Zhongxian commanded with narrowed eyes. If he hadn't come back on a whim, what would be awaiting him might very well be a river of blood and lifeless corpses. Zheng Yang and the others had accompanied him throughout his journey, and he had already regarded them as his kin. Those who dare to inflict harm on his kin must be prepared to face his devastating fury. If he couldn't even protect his students and butler, what was the use of him pursuing even greater power? Yes. Hearing the veiled fury behind the young master's words, Sun Qiong nodded. Having accompanied the young master from Tianxian Kingdom to here, he had gotten a clear grasp of the latter's personality. The young master was an easygoing person who was usually fine with anything. However, if anyone dared to threaten the safety of those around him, he would transform into a demon, destroying every single enemy in his way. Back then, when Lu Chong was mortally wounded by Ding Chong, Zhongxian charged single-handedly into Shenyuan Kingdom to destroy its royal family, exacting vengeance for his student. Since the Spirit Emporium had dared to lay its hands on them, the same fate would likely befall them. Sun Qiong pointed to the 4 men in the center of the main hall and asked, "What do we do with these men?" Zhongxian harumphed. "Cripple their cultivation and tie them up. We'll send them back as gifts at daylight." "Yes." Sun Qiong nodded before carrying the 4 men down with the great violet-wing beast. With their departure, only Zhongxian, Zheng Yang, and his other students were left in the room. Zhongxian had them execute a battle technique each and offered them some pointers on their techniques. Following which, he imparted them a simplified version of the Cosmos Bridge Realm Heaven's Path divine art before dismissing them so that they could spend the night slowly deciphering its essence. After which, he returned back to his room. Hula! With a flick of his wrist, a massive ape appeared before him. Byzantium Alio's beast. He had stuffed this fellow into the myriad ant hive nest earlier this afternoon, and since there was some time now, he decided to take it out. "You! What do you want to do?" The Byzantium Alio's beast had severe wounds inflicted all over its body, and its body was tightly bound, sealing his movements. Upon seeing the face of the otherworldly demonic tribe's royalty, it immediately gritted its teeth and roared in hostility, "Kill me if you want to, but don't even dream of making me betray my master." At the same moment, in a magnificent courtyard within the Master Teacher Academy, an elder abruptly stood up. "Musha, what's wrong?" a calm voice asked by the side. If the head of the apothecary school was here, he would surely recognize the owner of the voice was the junior whom Musha recommended here, Luo Ruoxin. "Lady Ruoxin, I think I sense the aura of Byzantium Alio's beast," Musha replied. Strangely, his attitude was extremely respectful, unlike how one would usually treat a junior. Most likely, Luo Ruoxin might really be a lady from one of the sage clans, just as everyone had guessed. Chapter 749, Fatal Danger Byzantium Aelios Beast. The young lady frowned. Do you mean the tamed beast of the old principal? That's the case. Musha nodded. I am an old friend of the old principal, so I am familiar with his tamed beast as well. Even though the aura is extremely weak, I am certain that it is him. As a close friend of the missing old principal, he was acquainted with Byzantium Aelios beast as well. It was just this afternoon that he heard that the other party had been kidnapped by the otherworldly demonic tribe, so how could he remain calm when he sensed his aura at this very moment? Knowing what Musha was thinking, the young lady said, Go and take a look then. Yes. Musha nodded in gratitude before rushing in the direction of where the aura was coming from. Watching Musha's departing back, Luo Ruoshin sighed deeply. Since it's so easy for him to find what he seeks, why can't it be the same for me? If only I'd known earlier, I'd have brought that with me. Now that I can only sense the rough region where it is, who knows how long it'll take before I can find it. Rubbing her glabella, she shook her head before turning her gaze back to the night sky. Just like that, the young lady stared deeply into the depths of the night sky, creating a transient painting of tranquility. You sure are loyal to your master. Seeing the Byzantium Aelios beast declaring his fealty to his master, Zhongxian shook his head. Who knew what kind of magic potion the otherworldly demons fed this fellow for it to obstinately hold onto their secrets despite the beatings it had taken? Are you really not afraid of death? Zhongxian asked coldly. What is there to fear from death? If I can be with my master after death, why should I be afraid? The Byzantium Aelios beast roared. This fellow. Zhongxian shook his head. The other party was extremely adamant on his view, unwilling to budge in the least. What in the world was this? The spirit beasts whom he had met before would usually be settled with just a kick or two, but not only did this fellow refuse to submit after all that beating, it still remained obstinately loyal to its previous master. Honestly speaking, even Zhongxian was feeling a little impressed by now. Its willpower was indeed commendable. This place isn't wide enough. Seeing that the other party was unwilling to submit, Zhongxian was just about to give it another beating when he looked at the cramped room he was in and frowned. The residence which Sun Qiong had gotten them was simply too small. If he were to summon the puppets here to pummel the Byzantium Aelios beast, the entire residence might just be torn down by them. If even this residence were to be destroyed, where else would his students stay? He had already used up his money on this residence, so it was impossible to purchase another one at this point. Forget it, I'll head outside the city then, Zhongxian muttered. As long as he traveled a fitting distance away from the city walls, he should be able to do as he pleased without alarming anyone. With such a thought in mind, he flicked his wrist and placed that fellow back into the myriad anthive nest. After which, he walked out of his room, activated the red dust heaven ascending steps, and headed to the skies. As the residence was located in a rural part of the city, there were almost no guards or sentries stationed nearby, so there was no need for him to restrict himself. Furthermore, as unlikely as it was, it would still be better to have the great violet wing beast guard the residence in case the Spirit Emporium sent another wave of assassins for them. When it came to the safety of his students and butler, it was better to be safe than sorry. Right after Zhongxian left the residence, another figure soaring through the night sky came to an abrupt halt. His aura disappeared. A white-bearded elder looked around him in confusion and frowned. Musha. As soon as he sensed the Byzantium Aelios beast's aura, he immediately rushed over. But just as he was about to zero in on the source of the aura, it abruptly vanished, as if it had never been there in the first place. Was he captured once more? Musha frowned. Even though he had declared that anyone who found the Byzantium Aelios beast would be declared as the next principal, this didn't mean that he should remain idle when an opportunity to save the latter appeared before him. The Byzantium Aelios beast was the tamed beast of his old pal, and he had slain many otherworldly demons in his time, saving countless humans from harm. There is someone there. Scanning the area, Musha suddenly spotted a silhouette on the horizon. Even though he couldn't determine the extent of the other party's cultivation, he should still be a saint at the very minimum, considering that he was capable of flight. To be traveling in the middle of the night, there's something amiss here. Musha frowned. I should go over and take a look. With such a thought in mind, he rushed toward the silhouette. Every single Saint Realm expert in Hongyuan City wielded immense prestige, and very few of them would choose to travel in the night. On top of that, the other party appeared as soon as the Byzantium Alios beast's aura vanished. This made the situation even more suspicious. Someone is following me. In the midst of his flight, Zhongxian suddenly noticed something, and his eyelids started twitching. His current plan was simple: find a quiet place, teach the Byzantium Alios beast a lesson, and force it to spew out the whereabouts of the otherworldly demons it was serving. Who would have thought that he would be followed as soon as he left his residence? To be able to mobilize even Saint Realm experts, it seems like the water in the Spirit Emporium runs deeper than I thought. Considering how his pursuer was flying in midair as well, there was no doubt about it, he was a Saint Realm expert. This fellow appeared right after he had subdued the 4 masked men, so the chances were that the Spirit Emporium had sent him here as well. To have such an expert make a move over just that bit of wealth, the Spirit Emporium sure was persistent. Could it be that there are some precious artifacts amongst the items received from the mystical treasure hall that I don't know of? As he had obtained simply far too many objects from the mystical treasure hall, he hadn't bothered checking them properly. However, considering that it was from Huanyu Empire, it should be unlikely for it to be worth much in Hongyuan Empire. Yet, the Spirit Emporium actually mobilized a Saint Realm expert for his possession. This was no different from making a mountain out of a molehill. I should lure him out of the city and get rid of him. The more Zhongxian thought about it, the more furious he felt. To send one wave after another, was the Spirit Emporium not tired of such games yet? Dispatching 4 ethereal trading experts is already bad enough, but to even mobilize a Saint Realm expert for us. Are you really that intent on seeing me rip apart your organization? So what if your men have reached Saint Realm? Not even the Byzantium Alios beast could subdue me, let more your men. If a war is what you want, I don't mind allowing Vicious and the other otherworldly demon puppets to make another appearance. Did you think that you could climb over my head just because I am a newcomer in Hongyuan City? No, I should still hold myself back. The Byzantium Alios beast has pledged allegiance to the otherworldly demonic tribe, so there is no harm in killing him. However, the enemy this time around is a human, and the Spirit Emporium is aware of this operation as well. If the other party were to be killed and an investigation were to be conducted, I might risk exposing the existence of the otherworldly demon puppet. While Zhongxian wanted to eliminate the conceited fellow pursuing him, he knew that he mustn't act recklessly. Saints were the top powers in the city. The death of any single one of them would cause a huge uproar, so it would be best to avoid that altogether. On top of that, given that the Saint Realm expert was dispatched to deal with Sun Qiong, the Spirit Emporium would surely know that their group was the culprit. If the Spirit Emporium were to pull some strings and make a case against them, Zhongxian might eventually come under scrutiny as well. And if the otherworldly demon puppets and Vicious were revealed to be in his possession in the midst of the investigation, it would be difficult for him to account for that. After all, how could a mere 4-star master teacher possess the ability to tame the head of the otherworldly demons and make those puppets obey his orders obediently? There was no way he could absolve himself of blame once this was exposed, so he had to ensure that he wasn't put into such a situation in the first place. But if I don't get rid of him, that will be a potential threat looming above me. What can I do? Considering the vicious deeds that the Spirit Emporium had committed over the years, what if the Saint Realm expert were to lay their hands on him, or even worse, his students? He couldn't possibly just sit idly and watch it all happen. Seems like it's about time to let Yangshe make an appearance. After a long moment of hesitation, Zhongxian made up his mind. With his current capability, without tapping into the strength of Vicious or the otherworldly demon puppets, it was impossible for him to stand against a Saint Realm expert. The only way he could get out of this situation was to hoodwink the other party. This wasn't his first time doing something like this anyway. As long as the other party acknowledged him as his teacher, the Spirit Emporium would be unable to send the other party after him. With these thoughts in mind, Zhongxian began reshaping his appearance to take on Yangshen's form. As his mastery of Heaven's Path golden body deepened, he became more and more proficient in warping his muscles to alter his physical appearance, making it difficult for even a 6-star pinnacle master teacher to see through the disguise. Not even Mo Gaoyuan had suspected that he and Yang Shi were the same person back then. Considering that his back was against the other party, it was late at night, and the other party hadn't seen his appearance yet, he should be able to discreetly alter his appearance without the other party noticing. After warping his appearance, he drove his Heaven's Path Zhenqi to alter the aura around him to create a fleeting and unfathomable impression. When all was done, he heaved a sigh of relief before discreetly sending a glance behind. Flaws. Zhong Xian muttered internally. In a sense, the flight of a saint could be considered as the execution of a battle technique as well as it required one to drive their Zhenqi, so he was able to compile a book on the other party via the Library of Heaven's Path. Wang. The Library of Heaven's Path jolted as a book materialized. As Zhong Xian's body continued soaring ahead, his consciousness was already immersed in the Library of Heaven's Path, reading the book which had just been compiled. Mu Yuan, 7-star master teacher from the Qingyuan Conferred Empire Master Teacher Pavilion. Saint Realm 3 Dan Cultivator. Flaws. 7-star master teacher. Saint Realm 3 Dan Cultivator. Zhong Xian's lips twitched as he nearly fell from the sky. What was with the backing of the Spirit Emporium? How could they possibly be able to mobilize a 7-star master teacher as well? Why would someone of the other party's standing travel all the way from the Qingyuan Conferred Empire Master Teacher Pavilion just to grab his possessions? Was this for real? It's fortunate that I didn't bring out the puppets, or else the one who would have been destroyed is me. While Zhong Xian felt frustrated inside, he also felt relieved as well. He could easily deal with Saint 1 Dan and 2 Dan spirit beasts with his bunch of puppets, but it would be a little iffy when it came to 3 Dan. At Saint 1 Dan Void Pursuit Realm, saints would open the Zhukong acupoint, thus gaining the ability of free flight. At Saint 2 Dan Spiritual Perception Realm, saints would open their incipient eye, allowing them to extend their psyche over a distance, perceiving everything within their range spiritually. Saint 3 Dan Embryonic Soul Realm was, in some ways, similar to Chrysalis Realm. In the latter, one would gather the Zhenqi stored within the Dantian to forge an embryonic core, otherwise termed as golden core. As for the former, an embryonic soul reminiscent of an infant would break out of the embryonic core. As a result, this realm was also termed as Origin Soul Realm. Once one's soul had been tempered into an origin soul, it would be able to tap into the power of the world. At this realm, one could be considered to have taken one's first step into sainthood, gaining the ability to overturn oceans and move mountains at a thought. Furthermore, this would be done not through brute force but via Zhenqi itself. Against a Saint 2 Dan, Zhong Xian's 20 otherworldly demon puppets could still overwhelm them with numbers. However, if the enemy was an embryonic soul realm expert, such a strategy wouldn't work. Even if he were to call upon vicious prowess as well, it was impossible to tell if that fellow had any other trump cards up his sleeves. If he wanted to call upon the otherworldly demon puppets and vicious, he would have to be completely certain that he would be able to kill the other party. Otherwise, it would bring endless trouble upon him. Forget it, I should see what kind of flaws he has and use it against him. Since neither fight nor flight was an option, he could only rely on his glib tongue to hoodwink the other party into obeying his commands. Success, he would be spared from danger, but failure, he would be squashed on the spot. Swiftly browsing through the other party's flaws, Zhong Xian suddenly saw something that left his mouth widened and eyes bulging. This. Chapter 750, Who Are You? The content of the book was simply too shocking. Even with Zhong Xian's worldliness, he still found it hard to believe his eyes. Forget it. However, this wasn't the time to touch on that, so he swiftly closed the book and went through the contents once more in his head. After ensuring that everything was correct, he drove his Zhenqi and abruptly stopped in midair. Flinging his sleeves, he placed his hands behind his back and stood silently, not even bothering to turn his head around. For an instant, his dashing profile resembled an immortal departing on the clouds. The friend behind, surely you should be contented with following me this far? His cold voice echoed in the night sky. Oh, I sensed the aura of a close friend, so I came over to take a look. On my way, I happened to catch sight of you, and my curiosity got the better of me. However, I must say that you do look rather unfamiliar. Are you from Hongyuan City? Mu She replied with a smile. Even though he suspected that the man standing before him was related to the disappearance of Byzantium Aelio's beast, he had no concrete evidence to prove it, so there was no way he could accuse the other party of the matter. Thus, he decided that he would engage the other party in a conversation in hopes of uncovering some clues from his words. Standing with his back facing the other party, Zhongxian harumphed. As a master teacher from Qingyuan Conferred Empire, how many of Hongyuan City's experts could you possibly know? You know that I'm from Qingyuan Conferred Empire? Mu She was taken aback. All along, the other party hadn't even turned around, and he didn't reveal his true cultivation either. How did the other party know that he was from Qingyuan Conferred Empire? The convergence of Zhengqi at the Yehai acupoint before flowing through the three mystic acupoints, Nihai, Wuwei, and Durang. Gathering the wood attribute spiritual energy from the world to nourish your body, but skipping out on the Huaihai and Longzhen acupoints. Such a bizarre cultivation technique doesn't exist in Hongyuan City, or even in Qingyuan Conferred Empire at that. If I'm not mistaken, you must be a member of the Mu clan, one of the sage clans, an impassive voice explained from the front. Who are you? Alarmed, Mu She narrowed his eyes. There was nearly no one who knew that he was from the Mu clan, and this included his closest friends in Qingyuan Conferred Empire as well. Yet, the other party spoke of it casually as if it couldn't be any more obvious. What was the identity of the man standing before him? On top of that, the Zhengqi circulation method that the other party had just mentioned was a secret art of the Mu clan, exclusive to their own clansmen. How could the other party know about it? Could he be a member of the Mu clan as well? Astonished, Mu She immediately extended his spiritual perception over and examined the man in front of him, only to realize that he was peering into an abyss. The other party's aura was so profound and deep that all he could manage was to scratch at the surface. Considering that the other party could see through his identity and cultivation with a glance, but he wasn't able to do the same. Could it mean that the man before him was even stronger than he was? Since when had there been such an expert in Hongyuan City? Who am I? Upon hearing Mu She's question, the man seemed to have been thrown into an ocean of nostalgia. Eventually, he shook his head and replied, "It seems it has been far too long since my last appearance that those of the younger generation can't even recognize me." There was a short moment of silence before the man continued asking impassively, "Who is the current head of the Mu clan?" Mu She was reluctant to respond to that question, but after a moment of hesitation, he still decided to speak up. "The current clan head is my uncle, Mu Yang." "May I ask if the senior in front knows of my uncle?" The current head of the Mu clan, Mu Yang, wielded immense reputation within the master-teacher pavilion of conferred empires, so there was nothing much for him to hide. He phrased his words carefully to indicate his identity as well, in hopes that he could exert some pressure on the other party and gain dominance over this exchange. "Mu Yang." The figure in front shook his head. "Never seen him before. However, I did meet with his father on one occasion." "Father? You mean old ancestor Mu Tian?" Mu She froze for an instant before shock embraced every inch of him. Mu Yang's father, as well as Mu She's grandfather, Mu Tian, was an ancient relic whose age exceeded 1300. While sainthood did alter the fundamental nature of one's existence, allowing one to live a lifespan exceeding that of ordinary humans, 1,000 years was usually the limit for most. Never had there been a saint who had gone beyond 2,000 years in age before. Thus, those who had lived beyond 1,000 could be considered an old ancestor of the clan, and they would hardly leave the confines of the main residence. To have met with old ancestor Mu Tian. Could the man be another old monster from the same era as him? But that was impossible. Even if those from that era were still living at this point in time, they wouldn't dare to travel beyond the confines of their residence so easily. In order to clutch onto the final sparks of life, they had to utilize all kinds of means. Otherwise, the heavens would mercilessly fall upon them and reap their lives. While he was unable to see through the cultivation of the man, he could clearly feel the overwhelming vitality within his body. This was unlike the wither that those old monsters suffered from. Yes, that lad Mu Tian. The man spoke deeply, his voice carrying the vicissitudes of life. "Lad. Mu She's eyebrows shot up. Old ancestor Mu Tian was a 1,300-year-old ancient relic, and yet the other party called him a lad? Just as Mu She was overwhelmed with shock, the person in front of him spoke up once again. The zhenqi of your Mu clan is centered around balance and harmony, allowing them to conceal their aura at will. However, your aura feels unstable, and it seems like your meridians have grown rigid. It seems like it has been many years since you have last returned to your clan. The other party was right, it had indeed been many years since he last returned to the Mu clan. It was to the point where most of those in the Mu clan had already forgotten about his existence. Your aura feels heavy. Wood attribute zhenqi should be ethereal, but I can feel the heaviness of the metal attribute within it. If I'm not mistaken, it isn't that you are unwilling to return to your clan, but that you were expelled from it, that voice continued. How did you know? Shocked, Mu She nearly lost control of himself and plummeted to the ground. The other party's deductions were spot on. The reason why he hadn't returned to his clan after so many years was not because he was unwilling to, but that he had been expelled and he was too ashamed to return. However, this was a secret he had hidden in the depths of his heart, and he had never spoken about it to another soul before. On the other hand, the Mu clan regarded it as a huge humiliation, so it was impossible for them to have leaked the news either. How did the man before him learn of this matter? Did he really guess this much just by peering into his zhenqi circulation? If that was the case, wasn't the man before him a little too overpowered? How could there be a person in the world with such discerning eyes? As a person who cultivates wood attribute zhenqi, your Yingtai and Tianmen acupoints should have a slight tinge of green, but it is taking on a dark shade of red instead. With just a glance, one can tell that it's the result of conflicting energies within your body. Of the 5 elements, wood curbs earth, earth curbs water, water curbs fire, fire curbs metal, and metal curbs wood. The only element that could cause such immense damage to your body is metal. If I'm not mistaken, someone must have planted some form of metal attribute energy within your body, thus suppressing your cultivation and talent, the man in front replied. Mu She's body stiffened. Every single word that the other party spoke dredged up the secrets which he had sealed in the bottom of his heart, leaving him terrified and apprehensive. The other party was right, he was indeed expelled from his clan. However, it wasn't that he was framed, but that he had committed an unforgivable act. The story had to be traced back to 500 years ago. Back then, the young and talented him had become a 6-star master teacher before even reaching his 40s, making him a celebrated genius within the clan. He'd thought that with such talent, even at the very worst, he would become one of the core elders of the clan and leave his mark in history. Who could have known that, in one of the experimental training sessions, he would meet with a fair maiden whom, after going through a life-and-death situation with, he would deeply fall in love with. He'd thought that even if nothing else in this world was constant, their love would be perpetual. He devoted his entire life to her, even going to the extent of imparting his clan's exclusive cultivation technique to her. But eventually, he found out that the other party was making use of him to exact vengeance on his clan. His clan soon learned of this issue, and with the crime of leaking out the clan's confidential secrets and bringing an enemy into their midst, he was expelled from the clan. After leaving the clan, he learned that the woman had planted a metal attribute energy deep inside his body at some point, suppressing his cultivation. As a result, despite 500 years of effort, he had only managed to progress from 6-star to 7-star high tier, unable to advance any further than that. Ashamed, he had always hidden this wound in the depths of his heart, unwilling to reveal it to anyone else. But the other party was able to see through it just by looking at his acupoints and zhenqi. Even 7-star master teachers didn't possess such an eye of discernment. Could he be an 8-star master teacher? But how could that be? Beyond 6-star, every single rank progression would become exponentially more difficult, as if trying to surmount a mountain that became increasingly steeper with every step taken. Take him for example, it had been 300 years since he had become a 7-star high-tier master teacher, but he was still unable to take the next step forward. As such, 8-star master teachers were extremely rare, and each and every one of them was a well-known figure whose reputation resounded throughout the master teacher continent. If the other party was an 8-star master teacher, he should have at least heard of him. But the other party didn't seem to fit any of the profiles of the 8-star master teachers he knew. Furthermore, why would an 8-star master teacher appear in Hongyuan Empire? With your cultivation suppressed by the metal attribute energy within you, you know that it is impossible for you to progress any further in your cultivation. Thus, you decided to stop cultivating altogether and spend your time with nature instead. So many years have already passed, don't you want to return back to your Mu clan and visit your family? The man in front asked. Even if I wish to return, how can I? Musha's face flushed in agitation. His clan was where his family and friends were, how could he possibly not want to return? But how could he return? Putting aside how his cultivation was beginning to decline under the backlash of the metal attribute energy within his body, just the deed he had done 500 years ago left him too ashamed to return. It was fate that I met that lad Mu Tian many years ago, and it's also fate that we met one another. Since that's the case, allow me to offer a pointer then. Perhaps, you might be able to break out of the chains you are trapped in. The man in front waved his hands. Pointer. Musha was surprised by those words. That's right. While it's hard for you to expel the metal attribute energy in your body due to your cultivation being suppressed by it, it isn't entirely impossible to do it. I'll impart a zhenqi circulation method to you, and as long as you practice it diligently, recovery won't be an issue, the man in front said. You will impart a zhenqi circulation method to me? Who are you? Musha narrowed his eyes. In fear of crossing the laws of the world, high-ranked master teachers wouldn't offer their guidance to anyone easily, unless there was a karmic debt involved. Take Empyrean Kong Shi for example. Even though he was known to have more than 3,000 students, only 72 of them had received his true heritage. It was the first time that the both of them had met, so why should the other party offer him a pointer? He might have been a genius when he was younger, but with his bodily function deteriorating and his cultivation declining, the potential he once wielded had already been sapped dry. What was the other party's goal for helping him? The ploy he had fallen into when he was younger had already cost him dearly. He wouldn't allow himself to fall into another scheme easily. Who am I? The figure in front burst into laughter. Are you doubting my identity? Hong Long. As soon as those words were spoken, an overwhelming aura abruptly burst from that man's body. Upon feeling the oppressive aura that the other party was exerting, Musha's body tensed up, and his blood ran cold. Before the compelling might of the other party, the strength which he had always taken pride in seemed as weak as a measly ant's. It was as though, if the other party willed it so, he could be torn to shreds the very next moment. Hong Long Long. Just as he was being suffocated by the immense power crushing down on him, the other party's aura abruptly changed. This time, it felt as if it harnessed the might of the world around him, creating an inviolable authority to his presence. It was as if the man before him was acknowledged by the heavens, his presence carrying the weight of the world itself. There was no being that was worthy of standing as an equal with him. Celestial Master Teacher? You are a Celestial Master Teacher? A thought flashed across Musha's mind, and his body began shaking uncontrollably. Chapter 751, Grand Teacher. Celestial Master Teachers possessed the recognition of the heavens. Their aura carried the might of the world, forcing all beings to submit to them. In the long history of the Master Teacher continent, the only man who was known to have become a Celestial Master Teacher was only Kong Shi himself. Even his direct disciples, the 72 sages, hadn't reached such a level, and yet the man before him was actually a Celestial Master Teacher. A freezing chill ran through Musha's body, and the immense fear he felt left him incapable of speaking. A Celestial Master Teacher was an existence whom even the heavens recognized, and yet he actually doubted such a person. At this moment, he was really dying to give himself 2 sharp slaps for the foolishness he had spouted. Who? Amidst his trembling, the figure ahead of him casually waved his hands, and that terrifying aura vanished instantaneously, returning an unnerving calm to the night. At the same time, the figure turned around as well. He was a middle-aged man somewhere between his 30s and 40s. He had a pair of sharp eyes that were gleaming with wisdom, and vaguely, one could see several thin strings floating within. Eye of insight. Mu She's body trembled in shock yet again. Even though it was said that a master teacher could comprehend Eye of Insight upon reaching 6 star, the truth was that only the greatest of geniuses were able to do so. Even within the sage clans, it was extremely rare to see anyone comprehending the Eye of Insight. Putting everything aside, even him, a famed genius of the Mu clan back in his days, didn't succeed in comprehending the Eye of Insight. If only he had comprehended it, he wouldn't have been toyed with by another back then, resulting in his current plight. Of the 10 great master teachers in Hongyuan Empire, not a single one of them had comprehended the Eye of Insight. Through this, it could be seen how difficult the feat was. This explained why the other party was able to see through his problems with just a glance and deduce that he was expelled from the Mu clan. Probably only someone who possessed the Eye of Insight would be able to do so. At this instant, the final sliver of doubt that Mu She harbored finally vanished, leaving nothing but respect for the man before him. Not daring to pull his weight before the other party, he bowed deeply and said, "I apologize for my insolence. I beseech Elder to enlighten me." "All right." The middle-aged man nodded. "That's more like it. You should be glad that I don't have the interest of squabbling with a junior. Stand still and don't resist it." The middle-aged man raised his hand and flicked his finger. Suddenly, Mu She felt a jolt run through his body as a zhenqi circulation method suddenly came into his mind. Every single word was extremely vivid, as though they were imprinted right onto his consciousness. Soul impartation? Mu She's face paled. As a 7-star master teacher, his soul was already sufficiently powerful to conduct soul impartation as well. However, to do it from such a far distance away, and for the content to be so clearly imprinted into his mind at that. Not even an 8-star low-tier master teacher could do that. Fearsome. As expected of a celestial master teacher, the Huaihai and Longzhen acupoints represent water and dragon respectively. Those are the acupoints where water attribute spiritual energy usually gathers in the human body. Due to the unique cultivation technique of the Mu clan, it's inevitable that you avoided channeling spiritual energy into those 2 acupoints. However, with your wood attribute zhenqi suppressed by the metal attribute energy, you could use these 2 acupoints to your advantage and resolve your problem. In the elemental cycle, water gives rise to wood. It can empower your wood attribute zhenqi, giving you the strength to overwhelm the metal attribute energy rampaging within your body. After imparting the relevant knowledge, the middle-aged man explained it impassively with his hands behind his back. At this point, Mu She had also just finished looking through the zhenqi circulation method which the other party had imparted him. Even though the middle-aged man only touched on the very foundation of cultivation, it was directed toward the root of Mu She's problem. It was as if the clouds which had veiled his eyes had parted all of the sudden, and before him lay a brand new world. If he were to practice the zhenqi circulation method, he was confident that he would be able to suppress the metal attribute energy in his body easily. Perhaps, after a 300-year stagnation, he might finally be able to take another step forward once more, to be able to see through the problems in his cultivation and offer a solution to it. The man before him was truly fearsome. Bowing politely, Mu She asked, "Teacher, I am deeply grateful to you for your enlightenment. If it's not beyond me, may I ask for your esteemed name?" As simple as the other party's teachings might have been, it had resolved the issues which had plagued him for several centuries. Considering what the other party had done for him, it wouldn't be too much to address him as teacher. Besides, if he could acknowledge such a formidable man as his teacher and receive his guidance, he might just be able to return to his clan one day. "Teacher." The middle-aged man opposite to him frowned. It seemed as if he was displeased with that address. "I apologize. I seem to have been getting ahead of myself. Given that you are a peer of my old ancestor, I should be calling you Grand Teacher." Mu She suddenly realized the other party's ties with his old ancestor, so he swiftly changed his words with a fearful shudder. "Ah!" Hearing Mu She's words, the middle-aged man seemed to become even more astonished. Naturally, the middle-aged man was Zhong Xian. The reason he'd assumed Yang Xian's identity was in hopes that he could strike fear into the heart of the other party and resolve the current crisis he was in. He'd thought that with the zhenqi circulation method he had imparted, the other party would consider him as a half-teacher, and that would make him abandon all malicious thoughts against him and his students. Who would have thought that under his hoodwinking, the other party would actually end up acknowledging him as his teacher? No matter what, the other party was a 7-star master teacher. With such prowess, he could be considered a top-tier power in conferred empires. For such a figure to acknowledge him as his teacher, it was no wonder that he would be shocked, so he ended up hesitating for an instant. Who could have thought that the moment of hesitation would cause a misunderstanding that resulted in the other party addressing him as Grand Teacher instead? The heck? This change was a way too fast. But since the other party had already addressed him as Grand Teacher, it would be awkward to get him to address him as teacher instead. Thus, Zhong Xian nodded and said, "I am Yang Xian." Yang Xian. Mu Shi nodded as he jotted down the name in his head. "May I know where I can find Grand Teacher if I have any questions for you in the future? It is the work of fate that we met, and it has come to an end with my impartation. If fate wills it, we will meet once more. Otherwise, it can only mean that our paths aren't meant to intersect." Zhong Xian waved his hands. It was too tiring for him to put on an act before a 7-star master teacher. He was already exhausted with just a few minutes of disguise. How could he possibly do it in the long run? Thus, it would be best if they never meet again anymore. Seeing that the other party was unwilling to get too involved with him, Mu Shi could only clasp his fist and bow to bid the other party farewell in disappointment. By the time he raised his head once more, the elder before him had already vanished amidst the night sky. Yang Xian, Yang Shi. Reciting the other party's name in his heart, Mu Shi sighed deeply. With this matter dealt with, he returned to searching the area for the Byzantium Alios beast, but with no results whatsoever, he could only return to the academy helplessly. That was close. After getting out of Mu Shi's range, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. He'd never thought that Mu Shi would actually be a member of a sage clan, as well as a 7-star master teacher. Why would a person of such strength and standing work for the Spirit Emporium? It seems like he was indeed looking for someone when he met me. Zhong Xian thought woefully. Just what kind of luck did he have? To think that even just a casual trip out of the city would end with him meeting such a formidable expert. It was fortunate that he had reacted swiftly to hoodwink the other party, otherwise who knew that would remain of him now? Forget it. Since my luck isn't too good today, I should return to my residence and rest for the day. I'll think about it after I tear down the Spirit Emporium tomorrow. Zhong Xian was still considering whether he should vent his anger on the Byzantium Alios beast, but considering the string of misfortunes he'd experienced today, he decided to drop the idea. Reverting back to his original appearance, Zhong Xian returned to his residence. When he walked in, he saw that the great violet-wing beast had already managed to make the 4 men bow to it in submission. Paying it no heed, Zhong Xian returned straight to his room and cultivated for a short moment. By the time he opened his eyes once more, the sun had already risen. Even though he hadn't slept the entire night, he still felt refreshed and energized. Stretching his back lazily, he walked out of his room. After eating breakfast, he called Zheng Yang and the others over to decipher some of the intricacies in their cultivation technique before finally heading to the Spirit Emporium with the great violet-wing beast, Sun Qiong, and the 4 masked men. The Spirit Emporium was the place where most valuable artifacts in Hongyuan City were traded. Even before reaching it, there was already a huge crowd in the area. This is a black market, so there is no prohibition on the sales of stolen items as well. On top of that, due to the shady background of these items, their price tends to be lower than the average market price, so it's quite popular among cultivators, Sun Qiong explained. There were laws in Hongyuan Empire prohibiting robbery and related crimes, so it was impossible to sell stolen artifacts openly. As such, they could only be sold at a lower price in black markets, and the Spirit Emporium was the largest one in Hongyuan Empire. However, the low prices of its goods did attract a fair number of cultivators. After all, cultivating was an extremely money-burning activity. Just like Zhong Xian, most cultivators had no financial backing, so they had to find some way to earn their own spirit stones and resources to advance their cultivation. As such, they were more than glad to scrimp wherever they could. Soon, Zhong Xian arrived at a majestic building several dozen meters high. To think that the building is a complete system in itself. If I'm not mistaken, it seems to be a massive, engineered product by celestial designers. Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. Despite the immense size of the Spirit Emporium, it felt like a single entity, rather parts placed together. If his deduction wasn't off, there should be many mechanisms installed within the building to turn it into a massive system of mechanisms. As expected of the center of Hongyuan City's artifact market, even the venue was an incredible artifact in itself. If this building were to be put on sale, there was little doubt that it would fetch an astronomical price. Putting everything aside, it would probably take dozens of 5-star celestial engineers at least a year of hard work, even if they were to work day and night without rest. Zhongxian walked up to the wall and placed his hand against it. After looking through the details in the Library of Heaven's Path, he nodded in commendation before following the crowd into the building. The interior of the building was nothing short of magnificent. All kinds of artifacts were laid around the main hall, and each of them was of decent grade. Even though there was no price labeled on them, considering how so many people were rushing to obtain them, they should be at an affordable range. "Young master, look." At that moment, Sun Qiong's tense voice sounded as he pointed at a certain direction. Zhongxian traced his finger and saw a patrol team walking around the area. There were 6 members in the team, and each of them possessed a cultivation of transcendent mortal 8 Dan at minimum. The one standing at the very front, presumably the leader of the group, was a transcendent mortal 9 Dan chrysalis realm expert. The patrol team is in charge of maintaining order within the Spirit Emporium. If anyone were to cause trouble in the area, they would be kicked out in an instant, Sun Qiong explained. Zhongxian nodded slightly in response. With so many artifacts lying around the room, and not to mention the vile deeds the Spirit Emporium did in the shadows, if they didn't possess some backing and power, their business would have long been overturned by rivals and enemies. This. Doubtful, Sun Qiong opened his mouth to say something, but he eventually closed it hesitantly. Wasn't the young master here to wreak havoc in their place? But considering how even the patrol team possessed such astounding strength, how were they supposed to cause any trouble? Most likely, they would be thrown out as soon as they tried to start something. Knowing what Sun Qiong was thinking about, a chilling smile surfaced on Zhongxian's lips. Violence is not the only way to wreak havoc. Since the Spirit Emporium dared to lay its hands on his students and his butler, it must be taught a lesson. But was violence the only way to teach someone a lesson? They were in Hongyuan City, the capital of a Tier 1 empire, not some shady underworld city. On top of that, Zhongxian was a master teacher himself, the role model of the populace. How could someone as noble as him possibly go around using his fists to beat others up? On the other hand, Sun Qiong blinked in confusion, uncomprehending of what Zhongxian was driving at. "Just follow me." Zhongxian chuckled as his eyes scanned through the various artifacts placed on the shelves. There was a wide assortment of items, ores, pills, armor, weapon, formation plates. Anything that a cultivator needed, it seemed as if one would surely be able to find it here. The cultivators in the area were also busy roaming the area, looking around for items suitable for their use. After a casual walk around the main hall, Zhongxian abruptly came to a halt. With a faint smile, he instructed, "Get an attendant over." "Yes." Sun Qiong had no idea what the young master was up to, but since the latter had issued an instruction, he dared not hesitate. Thus, he immediately made his way to the front reception. Chapter 752, Zhongxian buys an artifact. Not too long later, Sun Qiong returned with an attendant. As soon as he caught sight of the young master, he couldn't help but freeze in shock. At this moment, the young master was wearing an extravagant robe that screamed exorbitance. In his hand was a foldable fan, which he was using to fan himself leisurely. An arrogant smirk sat on his lips. From afar, it looked as if he was a profligate scion. What is the young master up to? Sun Qiong thought in bewilderment. However, not wanting to foil the young master's ploy, he suppressed his astonishment and walked up to the latter, clasped his fist, and greeted obediently, "Young master." Back in Tianxian Kingdom, the old master had also brought him to Tianyu trading firm once and behaved bizarrely. In the end, Ling Tianyu made a personal visit to their residence and even willingly gave up large sums of money to them. Could it be that the young master was trying the same tactic as well? Yuan Zhongxian nodded before shooting a sideward glance at the attendant behind Sun Qiong. You are the manager here? The attendant smiled. I am not a manager, but I should be able to answer most of your queries. The attendant was a young man who seemed to be in his early 30s, possessing the cultivation of transcendent mortal 5 Dan. As an attendant here, he was in charge of introducing and selling the products on display, so he did possess some authority here. That's good. I wish to buy a few items. Recommend me some of the more expensive artifacts here. Zhong Xian said proudly as he waved his fan leisurely. Expensive artifacts. Sun Qiong's eyelids twitched. He had conducted business at one point in his life, so he understood the various conventions in the market. For fear of being taken advantage of, most buyers would choose to maintain a low profile, feigning a lack of money just to push down the prices. Yet, the young master had actually asked for the attendant to recommend the expensive artifacts. Wasn't this practically screaming, I have too much money on hand, please take advantage of me? Such a customer was a dream come true for any store attendant. They would be mistreating themselves if they didn't attempt to make a killing out of him. Wasn't the young master here to exact vengeance? Why did it seem as if he was trying to give money to the Spirit Emporium instead? As expected, upon hearing Zhong Xian's words, the eyes of the attendant immediately lit up. He immediately walked up to a nearby shelf and gestured toward an item. Young master, this bronze gong is an excellent artifact smithed by a 6-star blacksmith. It has reached Spirit Intermediate tier. On the shelf was a bronze gong with several inscriptions on it. A cold gleam reflected off its surface. Let me take a look. Zhong Xian gestured for the attendant to bring the bronze gong to him. Sure. A gleam flickered across the attendant's eyes as he hurriedly took down the gong and passed it over respectfully with both hands. Zhong Xian casually took it and slapped it lightly with his palm. Wang! A resounding metallic call echoed from the gong, and a powerful gale swept into the surroundings, creating an immense pressure on the crowd in the area. This is good stuff. Nodding in satisfaction, Zhong Xian casually tossed the gong to Sun Qiong before glancing leisurely at the attendant. How much does it cost? After a moment of hesitation, the attendant said, Young master, this bronze gong was smithed personally by 6-star blacksmith Zhuquan more than 100 years ago. Not only is it a powerful weapon, it can also be considered as a valuable antique with significant history behind it. To be honest, it's one of the top treasures of our Spirit Emporium, so the price might be a little steep. Here it comes. Sun Qiong shook his head as he heard the words and the tone of the attendant. This fellow was indeed scheming. Seeing that the young master was a public gold mine, he intentionally phrased his words in a provocative manner, suggesting that the bronze gong was beyond the financial ability of the young master. It was a cliché trick, but somehow, it was peculiarly effective on those prideful profligate scions. Just as Sun Qiong was thinking that the attendant would be sorely disappointed, the calm young master of his suddenly harumphed coldly. A little steep. Are you trying to say that I won't be able to afford it? Sun Qiong clutched his forehead and nearly burst into tears. Young master, are you sure that you are here for vengeance? Why does it seem like you are a new rich scion in town asking for others to scam you of your wealth? Of course not. There is no doubt that a man as noble as you will be able to afford it. As if embarrassed by his previous doubts, the attendant smiled awkwardly. After which, he gritted his teeth in hesitation, as if he was going to make a huge loss from this deal, before mustering up his determination and said, This bronze gong is worth 5,000 middle-tier spirit stones, but your straightforward and candid personality has won my respect. Thus, if you really wish to buy it, I will negotiate with my manager to sell it to you at 3,000 spirit stones. 3,000? Sun Qiong spewed a mouthful of blood. What else could this be if not daylight robbery? An attendant was marketing this bronze gong to another customer when he came yesterday, and the offered price was only 1,000 middle-tier spirit stone. But in the end, the customer turned down the deal. Yet, this attendant actually dared to say that it was worth 5,000, and even acted as if he was making a huge loss by selling it at 3,000. Did he take them to be fools? Just as Sun Qiong was about to offer a word of advice to the young master, the latter nodded in satisfaction and said, "The work of a 6-star blacksmith is indeed worth such a price." Sun Qiong, wrap it up. I will be taking it. You will be taking it. Unable to believe his ears, Sun Qiong's body swayed weakly. Did the young master eat something wrong this morning? Putting aside the fact that they didn't even have 3,000 middle-tier spirit stones with them at the moment, even if they did, they shouldn't waste it on something as useless as this. What 6-star blacksmith or zhuquan whatsoever, it was clear that was all bullshit. With that much money, one could easily afford a spirit high-tier weapon. Why would one spend it on this? But since the young master had said that he would be taking him, it would be inappropriate for him, as a servant, to refute his decision. Thus, he could only go along with it. The attendant also widened his eyes in surprise at the sight. He didn't think that Zhongxian would take down the gong so swiftly. That useless object had already been sitting on their shelves for several months, and despite their best efforts, they hadn't been able to sell it out. Yet, the other party actually bought it without hesitation. It seemed like he had really happened upon an easy gold mine this time around. With a hand behind his back and the other fanning him leisurely, Zhongxian said impatiently, "Is there anything more expensive and better in the store? Don't tell me that the best product your spirit emporium has is only this spirit intermediate tier bronze gong." It was as if the item he had bought was too cheap, unworthy of someone of his standing. "We do. Of course, we have far better products than the bronze gong." The attendant's eyes lit up. Just as he was about to lead the way to the other shelves, he suddenly paused for an instant before asking, "Young master, regarding the money for the bronze gong." It wasn't that he didn't trust the young man before him, but it was difficult to tell what could happen in the next moment. To be safe, it would be better for him to collect the money first. "Are you suggesting that I'll renege on my payment? How dare you?" As if his dignity had been sullied, Zhongxian harumphed coldly. Just as he was about to fly to a temper, he suddenly fell into a momentary contemplation before saying, "Fine, take this. With this, you should work harder on finding items for me." With those words, he flicked his wrist and threw a spirit stone over casually. The attendant caught it and subconsciously glanced at the item in his hand. The next moment, he froze. High-tier spirit stone. The item that the other party had thrown over casually contained spiritual energy so pure that he could feel a tingling sensation in his skin. It was actually a high-tier spirit stone. High-tier spirit stones were only useful to chrysalis realm experts and above. However, due to its rarity, often, only Saint realm experts would have it in their possession. Yet, the other party threw it to him so easily just to purchase the bronze gong. He couldn't help but feel his throat run dry. That's right. A high-tier spirit stone is worth 10,000 middle-tier spirit stone, so that should be enough to cover the bronze gong, right? Zhongxian sneered coldly. Enough, it's more than enough. The attendant hurriedly nodded. All the doubts he harbored regarding the customer before him vanished in an instant. How could a person who would fork out a high-tier spirit stone easily possibly renege on his payment? Most likely, the other party was a young master from some wealthy clan, and having lived in luxury from young, he was accustomed to spending such large sums of money. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and lead the way," Zhongxian snapped. Yes. After seeing the high-tier spirit stone, the attitude of the attendant became even more respectful than before. He hurriedly led them through the crowd, and soon, they arrived in the depths of the spirit emporium. There were significantly fewer people here, but those who were present here were notable personages in the capital. The items that were placed on the shelves in the room were also clearly much more valuable than those in the main hall. Zhongxian swiftly scanned through the items. Spirit high-tier weapon, rare ores, a spirit fruit which can extend one's longevity. Under the discerning gaze of his eye of insight, he swiftly identified the various items in the room. As expected of the spirit emporium, even to someone as picky as Zhongxian, he couldn't help but feel a little moved by some of the items in the room. Suddenly, his gaze stopped on a certain artifact, and the edges of his lips crept up. Following which, he began walking toward a jade box on the shelf. Gesturing to the jade box, Zhongxian asked, "What is this?" This is a grade 6 bottleneck surmounting pill. A transcendent mortal 9-dan expert can advance one's cultivation stage by consuming it, and there are no prerequisites to it. On top of that, it was forged by Vice School head Luo of the Apothecary School personally, making it extremely valuable, the attendant said. Grade 6 bottleneck surmounting pill? The higher one's cultivation, the more difficult it would be to advance it. It was truly incredible for a pill to be able to raise a chrysalis realm expert's cultivation by a single stage without any prerequisites to it. It was difficult to imagine the value of the pill. Let me take a look, Zhong Xian said. Ordinarily, we wouldn't allow anyone to touch it, but since you are the one who wishes to look at it, I'll bring it to you. Knowing that the man standing before him was a big fish, the attendant agreed with a smile. Yuan Zhong Xian nodded. The attendant stepped forward, opened the protective casing, took the jade box from the shelves, and opened it gently. Hong long. A surge of pure spiritual energy gushed from the box, leaving one feeling refreshed throughout. It felt like, if one consumed the pill, one would surely make immense progress in one's cultivation. Green mist drifted above the pill, and it felt as if it would morph into a dragon at any moment and escape. Despite only being formation grade, perhaps due to the valuable medicinal herbs involved in the forging process, it was still pulsating with energy. Most likely, its price would be exorbitant as well. It's a good pill. A grade 6 pill. Even if I wanted to buy it, I couldn't afford it at all. Indeed, it's too expensive. The surge of spiritual energy from the opening of the jade box had caught the eyes of many in the area. The guests who were browsing through the other artifacts shifted their attention to the source. Seeing that the pill was catching many gazes, Zhong Xian waved his hands and said, "Close the lid. This pill is not bad. How much does it cost?" "I'll take it." Hearing that the other party would take it, the attendant closed the lid swiftly and replied excitedly, "As this is a grade 6 pill forged by the vice head of the apothecary school, using 81 different valuable herbs, it's inevitable that its price is higher than other pills. If you want it, you can have it at a discounted price of 2 high-tier spirit stone." 2 high-tier spirit stone? What kind of lousy price is that? Wasn't it 5,000 middle-tier spirit stones just a few days ago? When did the price inflate to 2 high-tier spirit stones? A huge commotion broke out in the area. Most of those gathered were frequent guests of the Spirit Emporium, so they had a rough gauge of the prices of the items displayed here. Even though the bottleneck surmounting pill had reached grade 6, it was only at a low tier. On top of that, the pill had barely achieved formation. As such, it was only worth 5,000 middle-tier spirit stones at most. To actually attempt to sell it for 2 high-tier spirit stones, that attendant must be out of his mind. Just as everyone thought that Zhong Xian would turn it down due to its exorbitant price, the other party glanced at the pill and said, "A grade 6 pill for 2 high-tier spirit stones, that isn't too expensive. I'll take it. He's going buy it." Everyone was stunned. They had seen plenty of foolish men in their time, but never had they seen such a dimwit before. Did price not matter to him when it came to buying items? "That's great. I'll have it wrapped up for you right now." Upon hearing that Zhong Xian would buy it, the attendant leaped in joy. He hurriedly passed the jade box into Sun Qiong's hands. However, at that moment, Zhong Xian abruptly frowned in worry and asked, "Could the items you sell possibly be fakes?" "Fakes? You sure are good at jesting," the attendant swiftly replied. "The items sold in our Spirit Emporium have undergone the appraisal of master appraisers, so it's impossible for there to be any fakes in here. If you were to find any fakes amidst our goods, our Spirit Emporium will refund you tenfold of the selling price." Chapter 753. These are all fakes. Tenfold the selling price? Is that for real? Zhong Xian asked worriedly, seemingly unconvinced by the attendant's words. "Of course. Our Spirit Emporium prides itself on its credibility," the attendant replied. "I see. Since you are willing to go so far to guarantee your credibility, I'll trust you for now. I'll pick out a few more items first before paying for them together later on." Hearing the other party's words, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Credibility? Sun Qiong's mouth twitched. An organization that murders others to steal their possessions, what kind of credibility can it possibly have? You've got to be kidding me. The young master actually believes this kind of nonsense. More importantly, regardless of whether the young master believes that or not, we don't have the money to pay for the items. The high-tier spirit stone given to the attendant previously was the prize which the young master obtained back in the master-teacher tournament. With even that gone, they were completely broke. How could they possibly afford the bottleneck surmounting pill now? Hearing that Zhongxian was going to pick a few more items, the attendant nodded in excitement. That's fine, feel free to. Since the other party was willing to toss a high-tier spirit stone out so casually, it could only mean that he had no lack of money. Besides, even if he couldn't afford it then, with the security around the Spirit Emporium, he couldn't possibly take the items away with him as well. The attendants in the Spirit Emporium were paid on commission depending on the amount of spirit stones they earned for the store. As long as he could seal this deal, he could easily earn a sum greater than the sales commissions he had received over the last few years. Yuan nodding, Zhongxian walked around the shelves before him, and raising his fan, he pointed to one item after another. This. Soon, he had already pointed out 8 of the items. Seeing Zhongxian pointing out so many items at once, the attendant's face slowly grew redder and redder. The items placed on display here were the more valuable artifacts in the store, and every single one of them was worth a fortune. Perhaps, he might just be able to earn enough money for his entire life through this deal. The attendant wasn't the only one who was reacting so intensely to Zhongxian's actions. The crowd in the surroundings had frozen in shock as well. Buying a grade 6 low-tier pill with 2 high-tier spirit stones had already blown their minds, and yet that fellow was still going on a shopping spree. When did such an extravagant, rich man come to Hongyuan City? I'll immediately take those items down for you. The attendant hurriedly took down the items pointed in agitation and began calculating the price. Leave those 8 items aside, wrap the remaining items up for me. Zhongxian waved his fan casually. Putong. The attendant's knees suddenly caved in at those words, and he nearly collapsed to the ground in astonishment. The lower jaws of the crowd fell to the ground. Even Sun Qiong nearly keeled over from those words. He knew that he had often behaved brazenly due to the old master backing, but from the looks of it now, he couldn't even hold a candle to the young master. To put aside the 8 of the items and take everything else. There were at least 100 items on display here, and a large portion of them were weapons and armor, which were valued at several high-tier spirit stones at the very least. To take all of them at once, that would at least cost 100 high-tier spirit stones. Could he definitely afford such a sum? He did know that he'd be pummeled to death if he failed to fork out the money later on, right? After a long moment, the attendant finally recovered sufficiently to ask hoarsely, "You want everything else?" He was still thinking a while ago that, with the commission from those 8 items, he could easily live extravagantly for the rest of his life, but the other party was actually intending to take everything else except for those 8. He had truly stumbled upon the god of fortune this time around. As long as he sealed this deal, he would have sufficient money to feed 10 generations of his descendant. That's right. Wrap them up for me. Zhongxian waved his hands arrogantly. Yes. The attendant pinched himself hard, and it was only upon feeling the sharp pain that he finally believed he wasn't dreaming. He hurriedly gathered all of the items together and began calculating the price. All in all, there are 93 items, and the total sum is 237 high-tier spirit stones, the attendant said with a quivering voice. 237 high-tier spirit stones? That isn't too expensive. Zhongxian nodded before gesturing to Sun Qiong. Butler, pay him. Pay him? Sun Qiong froze. You are asking me to pay him? But I don't even have a single high-tier spirit stone on me. What am I supposed to pay him with? Just as Sun Qiong was at a loss for what to do, Zhongxian abruptly raised his hand, seemingly stopping Sun Qiong from making a move, before gazing at the pile of items warily. Wait a moment. Are you certain that every single item here is authentic, and if I find any fakes, you will refund me tenfold? Of course. All of the items here were personally verified by a 6-star appraiser, Master Mo Fei. There is definitely no problem with their quality. The attendant swiftly reassured Zhongxian. I trust you, But I want to be absolutely sure that they are all authentic. How about you invite Master Mo Fei here to appraise them right before me? Only then can I dispel my doubts and buy these items, Zhong Xian said. This. The attendant hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right then. Please wait here for a moment, I will invite Master Mo Fei over this instant. After which, he swiftly rushed off. Well, given the sheer volume of items he is buying, it's natural that he would want them reappraised to ensure that they are authentic. That's true. However, I do know of that Master Mo Fei, and while he's a 6-star appraiser, he is living off the Spirit Emporium's payroll. Are his words really trustworthy? Even if he were to spout nonsense, outsiders like us would be none the wiser. In any case, it seems like that fellow has no lack of money. He is just probably asking for a reappraisal to calm his mind. Taking the scene in sight, the crowd muttered among themselves. Typically speaking, most artifact dealers would seek a third party to appraise their works so as to ensure reliability. However, appraiser Mo Fei was an employee of the Spirit Emporium, and that cast doubt on his reliability. As such, that young man was probably going to be hoodwinked. Amidst the muttering, the attendant finally returned with a pot-bellied old man behind him. The old man harumphed with his chin tilted up proudly. Who wants their item appraised? Appraisers were the most sought-after occupation in the market. Even the head of the Spirit Emporium had to treat him with respect. Me. Zhong Xian folded his fan and pointed it at the stack of items on the table. I want to buy these items, so I need you to appraise them for me. Mo Fei glanced at the items on the table, and his eyebrows shot up. I have already appraised every single one of these items, and there is no doubt about their authenticity. Why? Are you doubting my judgment as a 6-star appraiser? You have appraised everything here? Zhong Xian asked. That's right. What are you waiting for? Bring the appraisal certificates over. Mo Fei waved his hands impatiently. The attendant hurried off to the counter, and after some fumbling, he returned with a pile of papers on hand. These were the appraisal certificates of every single item on the table, and they were all signed off by Mo Fei. I see that there are appraisal certificates for them. Good. Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief as he took the appraisal certificates from the attendant and began browsing through them carefully. With a peculiar smile, he asked, I heard that the Spirit Emporium refunds tenfold of the selling price should any items be proven to be a fake. May I confirm if that's true? Of course. Mo Fei nodded proudly. As a 6-star appraiser, he was confident in his appraisals. All right then, I would like to turn your attention to this pill first then. With a light wave of his hand, the jade box containing the grade 6 pill flew into his hand. Why? Are you saying that there's a problem with the bottleneck surmounting pill? Mo Fei frowned. It is written on the appraisal certificate that the vice head of the apothecary school used 81 different types of medicinal herbs to create this pill, which can allow any chrysalis realm expert to raise their cultivation by a stage. Is that true? Of course. Mo Fei flung his sleeves proudly. While this is indeed a grade 6 pill, it wasn't forged by the vice head of the apothecary school. Furthermore, it was forged using on 72 different types of medicinal herbs. Judging by the slight yellow hue of the pill, it seems like the blood essence of a transcendent mortal 9-dan golden grassland antelope. The slightly incongruous fragrance it exudes hints at the addition of a sicklepod flower. Opening the box, Zhong Xian slowly analyzed it bit by bit. In a single breath, he pointed out the various key anomalies regarding the pill. With every single point that he mentioned, Mo Fei's face turned a shade paler. As a 6-star appraiser, he could tell that the other party's judgment was spot on. It was as if the other party was present at the forging process. To be able to deduce all of this in just a short moment, it could only mean to say that the other party's appraising ability was above his. So what if you can list all of the ingredients used in its forging? There are many variations to the bottleneck surmounting pill in the market. As long as it can advance one's cultivation, it can't be considered a fake. Seeing the young man before him go on, Mo Fei finally snapped. Advance one's cultivation? Zhong Xian shook his head. After all I have said, you still don't understand. The blood essence of the golden grassland antelope is indeed extremely beneficial to a cultivator, but that is only if it hasn't been mixed with sickle pod flower. Sickle pod flower, otherwise known as the flower of eternal rest, has to be mediated using the heptad verdant grass. However, the apothecary who forged this pill has failed to do so. In other words, not only will this pill not advance one's cultivation, the one who consumes it will even die of poisoning. Zhong Xian said. Die of poisoning? Is that true? If that's the case, that would mean that not only is this pill a fake, it is even a weapon of murder. Hearing those words, everyone leaped in shock. The reason a cultivator would spend their fortune on purchasing a pill was so they could achieve a breakthrough in their cultivation. Yet, not only would they not be able to achieve a breakthrough with this pill, it would even poison them to death. To part with their life savings just to be poisoned, that would be a true tragedy. Nonsense. This pill is rich in spiritual energy, how could it be poisonous? Mo Fei's eyebrows shot up. You don't believe me? Since that's case, bring a pill sample beast over then. We will know the answer with a quick test. Zhong Xian replied impassively. Fine. Mo Fei harumphed. Soon, a pill sample beast was brought over. Pill sample beasts possessed a constitution similar to humans, making them an ideal subject to test for the effect a pill would have on humans. You should do it yourself lest you say that I tampered with the pill sample beast or the bottleneck surmounting pill. Zhong Xian passed the jade box over. Humph. With a cold harumph, Mo Fei rubbed a bit of medicinal powder off the pill and fed it to the pill sample beast. Pill sample beasts were extremely sensitive to poison, thus, a small portion was more than enough for the test. Besides, if he were to take too much, the pill sample beast might end up dying from the excessive influx of spiritual energy from the pill. Goo 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 goo. As soon as the pill sample beast ate the powder, its aura suddenly intensified, growing stronger swiftly. Its cultivation is rising. This is clearly the effect of a normal bottleneck surmounting pill. What else do you have to say for yourself? Mo Fei turned around and sneered at Zhong Xian for his ignorance. However, at that moment, the pill sample beast's surging aura abruptly came to a halt, and its body began to convulse. Pu. A mouthful of pitch-black blood spurted from its mouth, and the small white beast abruptly froze before collapsing to the ground. Chapter 754. These are all fakes. 2. What? It's dead. Could it be that the pill isn't a bottleneck surmounting pill but poison? That is way too scary. Imagine spending 2 high-tier spirit stones just to buy lethal poison. The Spirit Emporium has truly gone too far this time around. Is this how it conducts business? Seeing the pill sample beast breathing its last, a huge uproar broke out amidst the crowd. They couldn't help but imagine what would have happened if they'd purchased the pill. They would have been filled with expectations for the future when they purchased the pill, only to end up dead due to it. The huge contrast between their expectations and reality was something that made the situation even more unacceptable. That Mo Fei had just confidently declared that the bottleneck surmounting pill was authentic a moment ago, but a minute later, a pill sample beast was poisoned to death by it. With such a precedent, how could they possibly ever dare to buy any pills from the Spirit Emporium in the future? This. Mo Fei also froze on the spot. In truth, he had carefully calculated the amount of powder to feed the pill sample beast. He was certain that it shouldn't have been sufficient to kill it with the dose he had rubbed off. Yet, it still ended up collapsing in the end. Could the other party be speaking the truth? This pill was not a bottleneck surmounting pill but a failed product turned into poison. So, is this considered to be a fake? Zhong Xian asked with a cold smile. This. Fine. I admit that my judgment was off for this pill. With the pill sample beast poisoned to death, there was no way he could deny this anymore. You are saying that your judgment was off for only this pill? Let me tell you, this pill isn't the only thing you are wrong about. Zhong Xian casually waved his hand, and the bronze gong which he had picked out first flew into his hand. According to what you have written in the appraisal certificate, this item was forged by a 6-star blacksmith, and it possesses the ability to wipe out a soul. Even a soul oracle would be utterly destroyed by a single knock on the gong. Indeed. Even though the bronze gong is only a spirit intermediate tier weapon, it has a long history behind it. The lightning energy that has gathered within it over time grants it sufficient power to destroy even a soul oracle. Mo Fei declared proudly. He had studied the bronze gong carefully over a long period of time, so he was confident that there wasn't any mistake in its appraisal. Since you are so confident, why don't we give it a try? Zhongxian turned to the attendant standing by the side and said, "You are a consonant spirit realm cultivator, so you should have already started cultivating your soul as well. If this weapon has the ability to destroy a soul, you should feel a sharp pain in your soul when used against you." At which, he turned to Mo Fei and asked, "Do you have any disagreements with this test?" While the effects of the bronze gong were discounted against most cultivators as their souls would be protected by their physical body, they would still be more or less affected by it. Furthermore, consonant spirit realm experts had barely started cultivating their soul, making them even more prone to any attacks on their soul. "I have no objections to it," Mo Fei replied. The crowd who were watching the commotion also nodded in agreement. Soul oracles had already disappeared in the annals of history, so it was impossible to test the bronze gong on them anymore. However, it should work fine against a consonant spirit realm expert as well. "I will let you do it." With the edges of his lips curled up, Zhongxian passed the bronze gong to Mo Fei. Mo Fei took the bronze gong over impatiently, and gathering his zhenqi, he struck it powerfully toward the attendant. However, the attendant remained completely unfazed by the attack. In other words, the bronze gong didn't have any effect on the soul. How is this possible? Mo Fei's face turned ghastly pale. Back then, he had even experimented with the bronze gong. The lightning energy it harnessed was extremely effective on souls, capable of even annihilating a soul oracle. Why did its effects vanish all of a sudden? Without that, this would only be an ordinary bronze gong, worth nothing at all. The bronze gong's effect of dealing with souls can only be dispelled by a soul oracle, but the heritage of the soul oracles has already vanished countless years ago. Thus, it is impossible for anyone to have tampered with it. Have I really appraised it wrongly? Mo Fei muttered as cold sweat trickled down his back. Souls were an extremely complex subject, and the only occupation to have truly uncovered their secrets were the soul oracles. They were the only ones who could dispel the effects on the bronze gong. No one else, not even a saint realm cultivator, could do the same. However, the soul oracles had already been eradicated by the master-teacher pavilion, so it was impossible for anyone to dispel the effects of the bronze gong. Since the effect clearly wasn't there, could his appraisal have been wrong from the very start? It was one thing for him to have made a mistake, but to make two of them consecutively. He was already beginning to doubt his life. Appraisers could only make 3 errors throughout their entire career, and beyond that, they would be stripped of their license. Was his career going to end here? Ignoring Mo Fei's slump, Zhongxian waved his hands, and a pill cauldron flew in front of him. Moving on, let's talk about this copper cauldron. You have identified it to be a 9-symphony cauldron created by a 6-star blacksmith on the appraisal certificate. It is capable of producing 9 symphony flames, which allows the heat to be distributed more equally throughout the cauldron, thus making it easier to fuse the medicinal herbs together. However, you also stated that it is extremely difficult to tame its spirit and make it acknowledge one as its master. May I confirm that what I have just said is true? This was also another artifact in the Spirit Emporium, and it had an appraisal certificate as well. Yes. Mo Fei nodded. This time, however, his tone wasn't as confident as before. Even though the 9-symphony cauldron increases the chances of successfully forging a pill, it is extremely difficult to make its spirit submit. This is a fact that all appraisers know, so there can't be any mistake on that. Mo Fei gritted his teeth. This isn't the 9-symphony cauldron, and it doesn't have such a troublesome spirit as well. It won't even take me a minute to make it submit to me, Zhongxian said calmly. You will make it submit in less than a minute? How can that be? If you can do so, I will admit that I am mistaken, and that it is a fake. Mo Fei sneered coldly. You must be joking. It is a well-known fact that it is difficult to make the spirit of a 9-symphony cauldron submit to one. To make it submit to you in less than a minute. You're dreaming. Not even a Saint Realm expert could do that. You are the one who said those words. With a chuckle, Zhongxian walked up to the cauldron and slapped it casually. Acknowledge me as your master. Wang. The next moment, a resounding buzz sounded from the cauldron, as if it was shaking in excitement from meeting its master. What? Mo Fei's body trembled uncontrollably, and he nearly spurted blood. That was clearly the sound of the cauldron acknowledging its master, of that there was no mistake. Due to the unique method in forging a 9-symphony cauldron, its spirit was disjointed, making it extremely difficult to win its loyalty. There were many who had spent decades on it, only to fail eventually. Yet, this cauldron actually acknowledged that young man in less than half a minute. Was he truly mistaken once more? The cauldron was a fake as well? Just what was going on? These lilac sandalwood beads can indeed keep one's mind composed when worn, but unfortunately, it is cursed. As a result, not only will it not keep one calm, it might even cause one to go berserk. In your analysis, you said that this bottle of medicinal solution is made using dozens of different poisons, and it is extremely useful for tempering one's body. However, I have just taken a look, and the poison within hasn't been neutralized yet. Anyone who consumes it will die without fail. You claimed that this ore can raise the grade of a weapon up a notch by fusing it in. However, it is impossible to melt this ore in the first place, so how could one possibly combine it within a weapon? After proving the issues in the appraisal of the first 3 items, Zhongxian moved on to point out the problems of the other items the attendant had taken out. He would pick up every single item and pat off the dust on them before explaining what was wrong with them. With every problem he explained, Mo Fei's face would turn a shade darker. By the time Zhongxian was done pointing out the errors in everything, Mo Fei seemed as if he was already standing on the threshold of insanity. He had the attendants test the other items as well, and some of them he even did it himself, but the conclusions were still the same. He was certain that the items here weren't like that when he was appraising them. Why did all of them change all of a sudden? This was exceptionally so for the weapons he had checked. Not only were the spirits within them difficult to tame, they were aggressive even. If a cultivator were to buy one of them, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't be killed by his sword in his sleep. There are actually so many fakes here. I have always trusted the products of the Spirit Emporium, but to think that they were actually such a dishonest business. How can I still trust them not to lie to me in the future? It seems like I can't buy anything from here anymore. The items may be cheap, but if saving that bit of money could cost my life, I would rather not take that risk. Watching the events unfold, the crowd in the area felt their hearts turning cold. The 2 main reasons they frequented the Spirit Emporium despite the unlawful means they used to obtain their items were due to the relatively lower prices of their goods and the guarantee on its quality. But even with the relatively lower price, if all they were going to receive was a fake, what was the point? Putting everything aside, if they had bought that bottleneck surmounting pill, not only would they be cheated of their money, they might even lose their life. Who in their right minds would pay just to have themselves killed? So, this is a fake as well. All in all, everything here is a fake. Zhongxian glanced at the attendants and Mo Fei calmly and said, all in all, you charged me 237 high-tier spirit stones for these items. Given your refund policy, I believe that you owe me 2,370 high-tier spirit stones. 2,370 high-tier spirit stones? They said earlier that they would pay tenfold the selling price should an item be deemed to be a fake. Now that everything has been proven to be fakes, it is only right for the Spirit Emporium to compensate him. This is insane. Even if the Spirit Emporium were to sell of its assets, it couldn't possibly afford that. Well, who asked them to brag about their refund policy? Not to mention, they even dared to put up so many fake goods on top of that. They had it coming. Hearing the young man's words, everyone leaped in shock. Putting aside the Spirit Emporium, it was questionable whether even the royal family had 2,370 high-tier spirit stones in its treasury. But considering how it was exposed before so many people, if it were to default on its payment, its reputation would be completely ruined. If so, they need not dream of operating in Hongyuan City anymore. Amazing. Sun Qiong's eyes were glowing in respect. He had been wondering how the young master would exact his vengeance, but upon seeing this sight, he finally realized how fearsome the young master was. If they had walked into the store and threatened the Spirit Emporium with violence, the Spirit Emporium would have held the moral high ground, and no one could have said anything no matter how the Spirit Emporium dealt with them. However, the young master challenged them through legitimate means, cornering them with the rules they had set for themselves. Let's see how you will deal with that. Even if you go to the Master-Teacher Pavilion to mediate in this matter, it is clear that you are in the wrong. It was impossible for the Spirit Emporium to pay the 2,370 high-tier spirit stones compensation. Even if it could, it would be severely crippled financially. With its reputation in shambles, it would never recover from this blow. With so many fakes in the store, who would dare to buy from them in the future? Who in the world are you? What do you intend to do? It wasn't too difficult to see through all of this. At this point, the attendant was already on the verge of tears. He'd thought that he had finally met his god of fortune, and he was looking forward to a life of extravagance. Who could have known that it was a god of misfortune instead? He might very well lose his job due to this. Who am I? I am just a customer in your store. Don't you think that it's only right for you to pay after trying to sell me so many fakes? Zhong Xian smiled. Chapter 755. Where are my artifacts? The attendant's body trembled. In the many years the Spirit Emporium had existed, there had never been a single person who had reported it for selling fake goods. In just a single day, this man actually dug up so many fake goods from their shelves. He'd thought that the other party was just a profligate scion who had too much money to spare, but he would be a fool if he still couldn't tell that it was an act at this point. That fellow was clearly here to cause trouble. Call the boss here, fast. He's the only one who can resolve this matter at this point. Mo Fei urged. It seemed as if he had aged decades over the last few minutes. As an appraiser, he could tell that there was no mistake in the other party's appraisals. At this point, it was already an established fact at this point that they did attempt to defraud their buyers. In other words, as long as the other party demanded compensation, there was nothing they could do about it. The problem was already beyond their scope. Yes. The attendant nodded and quickly rushed off. Soon, a cold-faced middle-aged man strode into the room. He was extremely tall with a slightly plump stature. The sharp glint in his eyes seemed to suggest that he was a person who would resort to unscrupulous means to get what he wanted. His aura was obscure, but it felt transcendent. Most likely, he was at least a nascent saint. Indeed, if not for the backing of such an expert, considering the vile deeds that the Spirit Emporium committed in the shadows, it would have long been rooted from Hongyuan City. The middle-aged man walked up to Zhong Xian and asked with narrowed eyes, "Are you the one who said that these items are fakes?" On the way here, he had already heard the full story from the attendant. Ignoring the other party's words, Zhong Xian waved his hands and said, "Hurry up and decide on how you will compensate me. Otherwise, trust me when I say that it won't take long for the entire Hongyuan City to learn about this." You. Clenching his fists tightly, the hint of killing intent flashed across the dark eyes of the Spirit Emporium's boss. All along, they had been the ones preying on others. To think that a day would come when someone would be so arrogant as to try to prey on them. The boss of the Spirit Emporium harumphed. "This friend over here, I don't know who you are or where you come from, but allow me give you a word of advice. Don't burn your bridges. Otherwise, who knows when it might come back to bite you." "Are you threatening me?" Zhong Xian chuckled lightly in response. "A refund tenfold of the selling price, that is the policy your Spirit Emporium came up by yourself. Are you going to silence me now that a fake has really appeared in your store? This isn't a threat, just a friendly reminder to you. The path of a cultivator isn't an easy one. I fear for your safety." Seeing the other party's fearless attitude, the boss of the Spirit Emporium was on the verge of exploding, but there was nothing he could do. If he were to make a move on the other party here, the reputation of their Spirit Emporium which he had built painstakingly over the years would be truly ruined. The boss glanced at Mo Fei and sent a telepathic message to him. "Are those items really fakes?" "I am not too sure either, but, when I reappraised the items he picked out, they were completely different from before. Even if I say that they aren't fakes, no one will believe me, Mo Fei said. Even if they weren't fakes, the other party had already pointed out the various flaws in them clearly. As such, who would still want to buy them? Take for example the valuable spirit high-tier armor which allowed its wearer to withstand attacks from a transcendent mortal 9-dan expert amidst the stack of items the other party had picked out. Its effects were incredible, but that fellow had already revealed its flaws and how one could overcome it. If so, what was the point of purchasing the armor? In other words, even if the items were authentic, they were already useless at this point. That would make them as good as fakes. Damn it. Hearing Mo Fei admit to the matter, the face of the boss turned scarily livid. Are you done with the negotiations yet? If you are, pay up. These items are worth 237 high-tier spirit stones, and with your tenfold refund policy, you owe me a total of 2,370 high-tier spirit stones. Alright, I will give you a little bit of a discount out of the kindness of my heart. 2,000 high-tier spirit stones, and I will drop this matter. Otherwise, for defrauding your customers and attempting to scam a master teacher, I will report this matter to the Master Teacher Pavilion to have them to judge this case, Zhong Xian said calmly. You are a master teacher? The boss narrowed his eyes. Typically speaking, as long one didn't commit any atrocities against humanity, the Master Teacher Pavilion would not interfere in most matters. However, if a master teacher was involved in the case, there was a good chance that it would intervene. This was a privilege the Master Teacher Pavilion granted its members. Once the Master Teacher Pavilion intervened in the matter, the various shady things they had done might be pulled to the surface as well, and the entire Spirit Emporium could very well be destroyed due to that. Even though there were quite a few people who knew of the Spirit Emporium's doings in the shadows, they had no evidence, and the Spirit Emporium had made sure to deal with them accordingly, be it bribery or silencing them. However, considering the means of the Master Teacher Pavilion, it wouldn't be too difficult for them to get to the bottom of the matter. That's right, Zhong Xian replied. After recovering from the shock, a thought flashed across the boss's mind, and he harumphed. Even if you are a master teacher, considering your young age, you should be a student of the Master Teacher Academy, right? Considering how many students there are in the Master Teacher Academy, I doubt that anyone will know if one or two of them go missing. The Master Teacher Academy was a place to nurture budding master teachers, and it was impossible to do so while keeping the students in a safe environment. Thus, it wasn't rare for the academy to dispatch its students on dangerous missions, and deaths weren't infrequent. It's indeed nothing much for a student or two of the academy to disappear, but I'm afraid that School Head Mo of the Beast Tamer School and School Head Zhao of the Blacksmith School will disagree with your word. Chuckling lightly, Zhong Xian flicked his wrist and took out the 2 tokens given to him. Since they were already in his possession, it should be fine for him to make use of their authority. Mo Fei's body shuddered upon seeing the tokens, and he hurriedly sent a telepathic message to the boss. Those are indeed the personal tokens of School Head Mo and School Head Zhao. They are real. School Head Zhao and School Head Mo were part of the 10 great master teachers, and they were famous figures even amongst the many Tier 1 empires. Considering that they had given their personal tokens to the young man standing before them, their relationship was anything but ordinary. They are real. The boss had thought that he was only dealing with an ordinary student, so the matter shouldn't have been too difficult to resolve. But who could have thought that the fellow would carry 2 of the school head's personal tokens on him? Alright, I will give you a tease time to think over your options. If you refuse to pay, I will head to the Master Teacher Pavilion. It just happens that I have quite a close relationship with Pavilion Master Mo, so I believe that he will happily seek justice for me, Zhong Xian said as he stretched his back lazily. Since the Spirit Emporium dared to threaten those around him, it should be prepared to face his wrath. You want to be domineering? Sure, let me crush you with my identity as a master teacher then. Let's see which of us is more domineering. The face of the boss reddened in rage, but he dared not to vent his anger. A tease time. On the other hand, the attendant rushed forward and reported something to him via telepathy. Hearing the attendant's words, the boss heaved a sigh of relief before turning to Zhong Xian. There's no need to wait a tease time, we will pay, for real. The Spirit Emporium is going to pay. But that is 2,000 high-tier spirit stones. Putting aside the Spirit Emporium, is there even so much money in Hongyuan Empire? Seeing the boss of the Spirit Emporium abruptly changing his mind, choosing to pay the sum, everyone was taken aback. Even Zhongxian himself was a little taken aback by the turn of events. He had prepared a hand in case the other party refused to pay, but never had he imagined that the other party would agree to it instead. You paid a high-tier spirit stone to purchase the bronze gong earlier. Even though you did say that you intended to buy the other items, you haven't paid for them yet. In other words, we have only sold you a single item so far. With our refund policy, we will repay you 10 high-tier spirit stones. The boss waved his hands and instructed, hurry up and bring 10 high-tier spirit stones over. Yes. The attendant hurriedly nodded before leaving the room. Soon, he returned with 10 gleaming high-tier spirit stones in hand and passed them over to Sun Qiong. Sun Qiong was a little dazed, unable to catch up with the happenings. He wasn't certain whether he should accept it or not. While the young master had pointed out many items that he wanted to buy, he hadn't paid for them. All along, he had only passed a high-tier spirit stone to the attendant. Using this loophole, the Spirit Emporium regarded that as the only transaction conducted and refunded him 10 high-tier spirit stones. While that was a substantial sum as well, it was at least a cost the Spirit Emporium could afford to bear. Regardless from which angle one looked at this matter from, the other party's response was also in line with the rules. Young master. Unsure of what to do, Sun Qiong turned to Zhongxian, only to see latter smiling calmly. Are you sure that's how you want to play the game? This master teacher over here, I am not sure what you are trying to say. Our Spirit Emporium prides itself on its honor. Since you paid us a high-tier spirit stone, going by our refund policy, we have already compensated you with 10. Even if you were to bring this up in the Master Teacher Pavilion, I believe that there is nothing Pavilion Master Mo could say about this. The boss of the Spirit Emporium smiled, but his eyes remained as cold as ever. On the other hand, you, as a Master Teacher, despite not buying anything at all, attempted to hoodwink us out of 2,000 high-tier spirit stones. Surely this would be bad for your reputation if word were to spread. After hearing from the attendant that the fellow had only paid a single high-tier spirit stone, he immediately thought of a countermeasure. A transaction can only be considered to have occurred when the goods and money have been exchanged. Even if the items we have here are fakes, you haven't paid yet, so they still belong to the Spirit Emporium. Naturally, we don't have to refund you for them. I see. Since that is the case. Zhongxian glanced at the boss of the Spirit Emporium impassively and said, you have taken my artifacts and placed them on sale for so long, but you still haven't sold them yet. It shouldn't be too much for me to take them away with me now, right? Artifacts. When did we take your artifacts and place them on sale? The boss of the Spirit Emporium was momentarily stunned by the ridiculous words spouted by the young man before him. This is the first time I've met you. When did I take your artifacts? Even if you want to frame me, surely you can do better than that. You are denying it. Zhongxian shook his head. All artifacts have their own spirit, and it is impossible to win the loyalty of the spirit without spending substantial time with them. This is common knowledge amongst all cultivators, so I believe that you, the boss of the Spirit Emporium, shouldn't be unfamiliar with it either. The boss couldn't understand what the young man was driving at, but he nodded in response. It wasn't easy to make the spirit of an artifact submit to one. There were even a few who were unable to get the spirit of their artifact to acknowledge them as its master even after years of effort. That makes things simple then. All right, I think I don't have to explain that only my own artifacts will listen to my command. That should be more than obvious to all of us here. With an upright posture reminiscent of a taut spear piercing through the heavens, Zhongxian abruptly bellowed with a resounding voice, what are you all waiting for? Pay respect to your master, Huala. As soon as those words were uttered, all of the artifacts in the room flew into the sky and gathered around Zhongxian. Chapter 756, All Mine. This is the response of artifacts who have acknowledged a cultivator as their master. In the end, all of these artifacts actually belong to him. No wonder he knows them so well. Is he the true owner of the Spirit Emporium? These are the most valuable artifacts here. If all of these are his, this would mean that the Spirit Emporium is pretty much emptied out. Seeing the artifacts flying from their places, everyone was stunned. All of the artifacts which the young man had appraised before, be they swords, chains, armors, cauldrons, each and every one of them was floating around him, humming in excitement. It was as if they had finally met with their master after great difficulty, and they were unwilling to part with him. All of the most valuable artifacts in the Spirit Emporium were in there. If all of those artifacts belonged to the young man before them, this renowned treasure vault of Hongyuan City would be emptied out. Those artifacts made up 70 to 80% of the total asset of the Spirit Emporium. Surely the young man, and not the middle-aged man over there, was the true boss of the Spirit Emporium. Sun Qiong's lips twitched. The young master, sure is vicious. He knew of the young master's ability to make artifacts acknowledge him swiftly. Back when he was appraising the artifacts, he'd touched every single one of them while explaining their properties. It was probably then that he'd made them submit to him. From the very start, there were only two options for the Spirit Emporium. They could either obediently pay up or have their assets emptied out. With all the weapons acknowledging the young master, even if he were to claim that everything was stolen from him, there would be no one who would doubt his word. Why you? As expected, upon seeing all of the weapons obeying the words of the young man, the boss of the Spirit Emporium nearly fainted. He'd paid a hefty price in order to procure those weapons, and he was certain that they were unowned when he obtained them. Why did all of them acknowledge that fellow as their master? Gaining the acknowledgement of an artifact was an extremely troublesome matter. Without sufficient time, it was impossible to succeed. For all of them to acknowledge him as their master, it could only mean one thing. In the very first place, all of these weapons belonged to him. He felt fresh blood welling up in his throat, threatening to spill forth at any moment. In order to buy these weapons, the Spirit Emporium had even incurred a heavy debt. If everything were to be taken away by the other party, the business empire which he had built painstakingly over the course of many years would collapse in an instant. Not only so, he would even fall into heavy debt as well. As everyone can see, these artifacts belong to me. However, the Spirit Emporium stole them from me, and left with no choice, I could only resort to such a course of action. All I want now is to bring my artifacts away with me, Zhongxian said righteously. Those artifacts belong to you, and you want to take them away. Pu. Reaching the limit of his tolerance, the head of the Spirit Emporium spurted a mouthful of blood. Like heck they are yours, I bought them with a huge sum of money. They are mine. You are clearly a troublemaker wreaking havoc in my territory. I have already given you 10 high-tier spirit stones, what else do you want? Do you really intend to take my entire fortune away with you? How the hell have I offended you that you must push me over the cliff? Since these artifacts are mine, I will be taking them back now. Sun Qiong, let's go. Just as the boss of the Spirit Emporium was overwhelmed with indignation, the young man before him swiftly stored all of the flying artifacts in his storage ring and turned around to leave. You. Hold it right there. Knowing that everything would be over if he allowed the young man to leave, the head of the Spirit Emporium roared furiously. The aura of a saint surged from his body, ready to unleash a fatal strike on the young man before him at any moment. Zhongxian turned around and faced the boss fearlessly. Why? Are you going to resort to violence now? You should know the consequences of snatching a master teacher's possession. If the master teacher pavilion were to learn that the boss of the Spirit Emporium had stolen a master teacher's possession before so many people, he would be severely dealt with. Even if he was a saint, he could potentially stand to have his cultivation crippled or even face death. A savage expression surfaced on the boss of the Spirit Emporium. I won't snatch the artifacts through violence, but unless you hand them over, don't even dream about stepping out of this building. Men. Voila. The patrol squads swiftly rushed forward and blocked all of the exits. Wielding a weapon each in their hands, they glared at Zhongxian ferociously, as if they would tear him apart if he dared approach them. On the other hand, the crowd in the area who were dragged into this matter turned pale in fright, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. If they had known this would happen, they would never have stayed on to watch the commotion. Now, they were doomed. To think that the boss of the Spirit Emporium would be so underhanded as to bully a junior. Despite the impending battle that was about to fall upon him, Zhongxian didn't seem panicked in the least. Instead, he sighed deeply. To tell you the truth, I was still contemplating whether I should give you a chance and leave some of the artifacts behind. However, since you are so shameless, don't blame me for getting nasty then. Disappointment was reflected in Zhongxian's eyes. Shaking his head, he walked calmly over to the shelves, opened the casing, and tapped on the metal hammer within it twice. This is mine. Following which, he walked over to another artifact and tapped on it as well. This is mine too. Mine as well. Still mine. All mine. Soon, he tapped the 8 remaining items in the room. The boss of the Spirit Emporium was still wondering what that fellow was up to when all of the artifacts suddenly hummed excitedly, acknowledging Zhongxian as their master. Every single one of them flew into the air and floated right by the young man's side. The heck? The boss was on the verge of insanity. That fellow was not planning to take away most of the Spirit Emporium's asset, he was planning on taking away all of its asset. If the other party was allowed to do as he pleased, everything in the Spirit Emporium would be his in less than 5 minutes. Screw him. Stop him, the boss bellowed. Hong Long. Hearing the boss's command, the guards rushed at Zhongxian to stop him, but the next instant, countless artifacts abruptly appeared and struck them. The artifacts were protecting their master. If those guards wanted to get to Zhongxian, they would have to get past the artifacts first. Even though the offensive capabilities of the artifacts weren't too strong as there was no one driving them, they still managed to stall the guards. These artifacts were the possessions of the Spirit Emporium, so they didn't dare to strike too hard for fear of damaging any of them. Boss. The head of the guards called out. All of you, scram. Reaching the limits of his tolerance, the boss roared. The power of a saint burst from his body, and under the suppression of the violent aura, the floating artifacts fell to the ground powerless with a jolt. Clang 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 clang. What are you doing? You know that you have to pay for damaging my artifacts, right? Zhongxian frowned. Pay. Pay your head. Bursting with fury, the boss could maintain his composure no longer and began hurling curses. All of those items were my precious artifacts, but you used some kind of sorcery to make them submit to you. You were the one who stole my treasures, and you still want me to pay you? How can there be such a shameless person in the world? Today, you need not try to leave. The more he thought about it, the more furious he felt. Thus, he stomped his feet. Hong Long. The Spirit Emporium began to tremor, and all of the doors slammed shut. 2 towering walls rose from the ground, covering all of the shelves where the artifacts were supposed to be placed. It's a mechanism. I have long heard that the boss of the Spirit Emporium paid a heavy price in order to build this building, inviting 40 students of the Celestial Designer School to work day and night for half a year to rush this out. I thought that those were just rumors, but it was actually true. Now that the Spirit Emporium has been locked down, how are we supposed to leave? I have no idea either. Let's just hope that we won't be implicated in this matter. I doubt so. That young man is a master teacher, so if the boss were to kill him, we would be eyewitnesses to the deed. Seeing the boss fly into a rage and activate the mechanism of the Spirit Emporium to shut all of the exits, preventing anyone from entering or leaving, the crowd that was trapped inside stared at one another with faces pale with fright. If the boss were to really kill that master teacher, they, as eyewitnesses, surely wouldn't fare any better either. After all, if the matter were to be leaked to the master teacher pavilion, the boss would be pursued by them to the ends of the world. Standing beside Zhongxian, Sun Qiong's face paled as well. The young master's cultivation was only at the Cosmos Bridge realm, but the enemy he was facing was a saint. This time, they were really in deep trouble. Zhongxian had never told anyone about the otherworldly demon puppets or vicious, so Sun Qiong was unaware of their existence as well. So, are you intending on killing a master teacher? Seeing the other party activating the lockdown function of the Spirit Emporium, Zhongxian turned to the boss and frowned. Gritting his teeth in rage, the boss sneered. Kill a master teacher? How could I dare to do so? However, if you don't hand over my possessions this instant, I fear that I might not be able to hold myself back. Your possessions. These artifacts addressed me as their master and protected me. Are your eyes too blind to see that? On the contrary, my possessions have brought your store prestige and class, so the least you can do is pay me the rental fee, right? Zhong Xian replied nonchalantly. The boss staggered upon hearing those words. He felt as if he might just die of anger if he were to continue speaking. If that fellow pay you the rental fee? You stole my possessions, and you still want me to pay you? Do you take me for a fool? Hong long long. An immense accumulation of zhenqi gathered in the boss's palm, as if of the materialization of his rage. I will give you one last warning. Return those items to me, and I can consider sparing you. I won't say this again, he threatened menacingly. Were it not for his fear of school head Mo and school head Zhao, he would have long made a move. Even so, his overwhelming rage was threatening to remove all reason from him, compelling him to make a move. Seeing the mass of zhenqi in the other party's hands threatening to rip him to pieces any moment now, Zhong Xian shook his head. Warning. I have seen plenty of bandits in my life, but I have never seen one who steals as brazenly as you do. You are truly incredible. Since that is the case, allow me to let you in on a secret then. He abruptly leaped several dozen meters forward and stepped heavily on the ground before leaping in another direction. He continued another 7 times before returning back to his original position. A secret? What are you up to? Seeing that the fellow was up to something once more, the boss glared at him warily. On the other hand, Zhong Xian smiled brightly and said, the fact is, this spirit emporium is mine as well. Catcher. Catcher. A series of mechanisms abruptly spun into action, and the entire spirit emporium began to shake in euphoria. What? The spirit emporium has acknowledged him as its master as well? The boss felt as if the entire world had gone mad. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.